I was the most dirt poor student in my entire university class. Meanwhile, she was a wealthy, pampered young heiress born with a literal silver spoon in her mouth during a completely mindless game of truth or dare. She lost a massive bet and was forced to transfer $90,000 directly to me. Absolutely everyone present assumed she would shamelessly back out of the deal. Instead, she casually executed the wire transfer right then and there, attaching a blunt four-word caption, "A bet's a bet." From that monumental day onward, my everyday existence completely transformed. The premium seafood rice bowls in the cafeteria that I could never dream of affording. I started ordering them daily and at the boba shop right beneath my dorm building. I transitioned from being a broke part-time employee to a regular VIP customer. Even those expensive post-grad exam prep materials sitting next to the library shelves. I could finally afford to purchase the entire comprehensive set. She never once badgered me about how I was spending her cash, and I never felt obligated to give her a single explanation. 4 grueling years later, on the exact afternoon of our graduation ceremony, my bank account was drained down to a mere 82 cents. Her money had perfectly carried me up until the exact microsecond I held my degree. An additional 4 years flew by in a flash. One night beneath a bleak highway overpass, I spotted a shivering, curled-up figure. Her face was completely caked in filth, and her clothes were nothing but tattered rags. Yet I recognized those eyes instantly. It was Su Yuanyuan. Rumors had been swirling that her family's empire had completely collapsed into bankruptcy. Her parents had fled the country to escape the law, leaving her entirely alone to shoulder the astronomical weight of their debts. I crouched down to her level, extending an open hand. "Will you come with me?" She froze in absolute bewilderment, and heavy tears instantly cascaded down her cheeks. The exact moment my phone began violently vibrating, I was sitting on the 3rd floor of the campus cafeteria, aggressively shoveling food. It was just a single bowl of plain white rice, paired with a complimentary cup of free broth. The smartphone screen suddenly illuminated, flashing the name Jiangzhe across the display. I casually pressed the answer button. A stray grain of rice still stuck to my thumb. "Where are you at?" "Guillaume?" Jiangji's voice was deafening over the receiver, completely drowned out by loud music and booming laughter. I swallowed my food before answering, "The cafeteria, obviously." "Get your ass over to the Golden Palace KTV, VIP Lounge 302. It's Yuanyuan's birthday bash." My brows instantly knit together in deep annoyance. Su Yuanyuan was the absolute wealthiest girl in our entire department. What on earth did her birthday have to do with someone like me? "I think I'll sit this one out," I muttered, forcing the dry rice down my throat, feeling a bit suffocated. "Cut the crap. It's a ticket. Yuanyuan personally called you out, so you better drop everything and get here now." The line suddenly went completely dead. I stared blankly down at the remaining half bowl of plain rice, losing my appetite entirely. Showing up meant I'd inevitably have to fork over cash to split the bill. And a wild night out here would easily drain $200 or $300. That was literally half a month's worth of my grocery budget. But skipping wasn't an option since Su Yuanyuan had explicitly demanded my presence. I was pretty much a ghost in that department with 0 real friends, aside from Jiangzhe, who was just an aggressively extroverted, overly familiar roommate of mine. Making an enemy out of a wealthy heiress would bring me absolutely 0 benefits. I quietly set my cheap utensils down, stepping out into the crisp evening air as I left the cafeteria behind. The autumn wind bit through the air with a distinct chill, prompting me to tightly wrap myself in an old, completely faded jacket. The notorious Golden Palace KTV was luckily situated not too far from our campus, requiring only a brisk 20-minute walk. The elite valet staff at the entrance gave me a quick, judgmental sweep, their eyes radiating pure, unadulterated snobbery. I completely ignored their condescending glares, marching directly up to the 3rd floor toward VIP Lounge 302. The heavy door wasn't fully latched, allowing the deafening bass-boosted music to violently shake the hallway. I pushed the door open, revealing a massive, luxurious suite packed with over 20 of my classmates. The marble tables were overflowing with premium fruit platters, gourmet snacks, and high-end liquor. Su Yuanyuan was positioned dead center of the entire gathering, draped in a stunning, breathtaking designer dress that made her look exactly like a pampered royal princess. Jiangzhe spotted me instantly through the neon lights, frantically waving his hand, "Yo, over here." I quietly navigated my way through the crowd, sinking into a dim, isolated sofa corner, where absolutely nobody paid me a shred of attention. The entire room was aggressively hovering around Su Yuanyuan, laughing at her jokes, belting out karaoke tracks and aggressively slamming dice cups. I felt entirely alien, completely detached from this extravagant environment. The very air in the room practically reeked of extreme wealth. After a while, someone loudly complained that karaoke was getting boring, suggesting they spice things up with a wild game of truth or dare. The tipsy crowd immediately roared in approval, and an empty green beer bottle began violently spinning on the glass table. I silently prayed to whatever deity was listening, begging that the bottle wouldn't point at me. Fortunately, it barely skimmed past my direction a couple of times. But then the spinning bottle slowed down and pointed directly at Su Yuanyuan, causing the entire lounge to erupt into absolute cheers. A guy from our class eagerly shouted, "Yuan Yuan, are you choosing a brutal truth or a crazy dare?" Su Yuan Yuan had clearly knocked back a few premium drinks, her pristine cheeks flushed with a faint, intoxicating crimson. She flashed a confident smirk and declared, "Dare." The guy who asked was named Lija, a notorious clout chaser who loved being the absolute center of attention. His eyes suddenly gleamed with malice as he shifted his gaze directly toward me. "Hey, Yuan Yuan, do you actually have the guts to place a crazy wager with that guy sitting right behind your right shoulder?" "Yeah, I'm talking about Li Xuan." In an instant, every single eyeball in the room focused entirely on my pathetic form. My entire body completely froze in mortification. Su Yuan Yuan turned her head, giving me a calculated, sweeping glance, her eyes radiating that unique brand of curiosity found only in elite, wealthy heiresses. "What's the actual wager?" Lija burst into a mocking laugh, his voice incredibly loud and obnoxious. "Let's wager whether you have the guts to wire a whopping $90,000 to him right this second." The entire luxury lounge fell into a stunned dead silence for a fraction of a second, before erupting into an even more deafening chorus of mocking laughter. 90,000. Yolija, have you completely lost your mind? This is supposed to be a harmless party game. You can't just throw out a massive unhinged number like that. Exactly. There's no way Yuan Yuan would ever agree to that. Lija simply shrugged his shoulders dismissively. "Oh, so you're too scared. If you don't have the guts, your punishment is to chug 3 full shots of liquor." He was actively trying to humiliate Su Yuan Yuan in front of everyone, while simultaneously making an absolute clown out of me. The entire room sat in anticipation, staring intently at Su Yuan Yuan. I could literally feel my face burning with a furious, suffocating heat. $90,000, a number they casually tossed around like it was nothing. While just a few days ago, my mother called me weeping because our family home's renovation was short by $20,000, leaving my parents completely sleepless from pure anxiety. Yet here I sat, treated like a literal entertainment prop. Su Yuan Yuan remained completely silent, her eyes locked onto me, with an expression that was remarkably calm and unreadable, devoid of any blatant mockery, yet containing absolutely zero pity. It was as if she were strictly calculating the chaotic entertainment value of this dare. Zhangjin nudged me hard with his elbow from beside the couch, whispering under his breath, "Bro, don't take any of this to heart. Lija is just a complete brainless idiot." But it was physically impossible for me not to take it to heart. When your basic human dignity is being actively crushed and trampled into the dirt by rich kids using money as a weapon, you absolutely cannot just brush it off. Suddenly, a stunning smile broke across Su Yuan Yuan's face. "Sure, why the hell not?" She casually snatched her designer phone off the glass table, effortlessly opening up her premium banking app. The entire crowd of onlookers instantly froze in shock, genuinely assuming she was just pulling off a massive bluff. She lifted her gaze, locking her eyes onto mine once more. "What's your mobile number?" An absolute suffocating silence blanketed the entire VIP lounge, with nothing but the bass-heavy music continuing to thump in the background. Every single person stood paralyzed, staring blankly at Su Yuan Yuan. They couldn't believe she was actually going through with it, before instantly snapping their attention back to my completely paralyzed form. Lija's smug, arrogant smirk froze perfectly on his face, morphing into total shock. Even Zhang Ji was utterly dumbfounded, his jaw dropping as he completely lost the ability to speak. I felt an intense rush of adrenaline shoot straight to my brain. A mobile number? She was actually demanding my personal phone number. My throat felt completely parched and bone dry, making it physically impossible to squeeze out a single syllable. Yet, Su Yuan Yuan remained incredibly patient, quietly raising her device and repeating the query with total poise, "What's the number?" In a completely robotic dazed trance, I blurted out the string of digits. She immediately lowered her head, her manicured fingers flying effortlessly across the glowing screen. The entire room of onlookers began exchanging bewildered glances, whispering frantically under their breaths, "Is she actually going to wire it? No way in hell, right? That's a whopping 90,000 grand we're talking about. No one would blow that much cash just to save face." I kept my eyes completely locked onto her. The expression on her face was deeply focused, as if she were merely executing a completely mundane everyday bank transaction. A few agonizing seconds later, she casually set her smartphone back down on the table and locked her eyes directly onto a visibly sweating Lija. "Done." Lija's face looked incredibly pale and twisted. "Yuan Yuan, come on, you didn't actually..." But Su Yuan Yuan instantly cut him off. Her tone completely flat and unbothered, "A bet's a bet." The moment the words left her lips, she raised her cocktail glass for a graceful sip, never casting a single glance back in my direction, acting as if this monumental event was already ancient history. Suddenly, deep inside my pants pocket, my phone let out a sharp, aggressive vibration. My hand was shaking violently as I reached down to retrieve it. The screen illuminated brightly, displaying an official automated SMS notification from my bank. "Dear customer, your registered savings account ending in specified digits XXXX has processed a transaction on this date. Your account has successfully received a deposit of exactly 90,000.00 RMB. Your new available balance is 90,088.82 RMB. That massive string of digits practically burned straight through my retinas. $88.82. That was the absolute entirety of my remaining grocery budget for the month. But now added together, it was a staggering $90,088.82. I quickly shoved the device back into my pocket, my palms completely drenched in cold sweat. I abruptly stood up from the sofa, and the entire room instantly locked their eyes onto me. Their expressions were a volatile, complex mix of emotions, ranging from absolute shock and bitter envy, to the sick anticipation of watching a dramatic train wreck. I chose to utter absolutely nothing, turning sharply on my heel to march straight toward the exit of the KTV lounge. Jiangju desperately yelled out behind me, "Hey Li Xuan, where the hell are you going?" I didn't look back even once. I marched straight out of the Golden Palace KTV, and the freezing night wind slapped my face, making me shudder violently. As my mind went completely blank, I aimlessly roamed the city streets for an eternity, having absolutely no clue where I was headed. Passing by a 24-hour convenience store, I stepped inside and stood frozen in front of the shelves for the longest time. Ultimately, I reached out and grabbed the most expensive brand of instant ramen, a premium ham sausage, and a savory marinated egg. The grand total at checkout was $15. Before tonight, I only ever dared to buy the $3 bag of instant noodles. Clutching my plastic bag, I quietly slunk back into my dorm room. The space was entirely vacant. Zhangzhe and the other guys hadn't returned from the party yet. I flipped on the electric kettle to boil some water, and the moment the scorching steam rose from the ramen cup, I finally felt a semblance of life returning to my frozen body. Sitting down at my desk, I pulled out my smartphone and read that automated text message once more, $90,000. I counted that long string of zeros over and over again, realizing that this cash could instantly erase my mother's suffocating anxiety and give her back her sleep. It meant I never have to starve in the cafeteria chugging free broth, and it meant I could finally purchase the comprehensive set of graduate exam prep materials stacked right next to the library shelves that I had lusted after for so long. It could actually allow me to live with some goddamn dignity. I aggressively inhaled the bowl of noodles, gulping down every single drop of broth until it was spotless, before pulling out a fresh blank notebook. My fingers were still trembling slightly, but my gaze had become incredibly sharp and focused. On the very first page of that notebook, I boldly inked 4 words: the 4-year plan. Then I meticulously began running the numbers. 4 years of university equaled exactly 48 months. I capped my monthly living expenses at a strict $800, which brought the grand total for 48 months to $38,400. Tuition cost $5,000 a year, so the remaining 3 years would demand $15,000. I budgeted another $5,000 for crucial exam materials and academic reference books, plus the flat $20,000 needed to finalize my family's home construction. Tallying everything up brought the grand total to precisely $78,400. The leftover $11,600 would serve as an absolute emergency fund, completely locked away and never to be touched unless a crisis hit. I mapped out every single expense with absolute mathematical precision. This $90,000 wasn't just some miraculous lottery win from the heavens. It was a debt Su Yuan legally owed after losing a dare. And it represented the absolute life support for my next 4 years. I was going to squeeze every single ounce of value out of it. I will utilize it strictly to keep my head above water until I graduate, secure my hard-earned degree, and land myself a lucrative high-paying career. Once that's done, I'll pay her back every single cent with full interest. By the time I finished carefully scratching out the final word, the dark horizon was already bleeding into early dawn. I locked my gaze onto the meticulous blueprint laid out in my notebook, feeling an unprecedented wave of profound absolute tranquility wash over my soul. The very next morning, as I headed over to my first class, I immediately spotted Su Yuan right at the entrance of the academic building. She was casually surrounded by a clique of popular girls laughing and gossiping, flaunting a brand new, incredibly lavish designer dress that was entirely different from the outfit she wore the previous night. Our eyes locked and she froze slightly for a brief fraction of a second, before shifting her gaze away as if absolutely nothing out of the ordinary had occurred, effortlessly turning back to continue chatting with her wealthy entourage. I mirrored her cold indifference, dipping my head down to quickly blend into the classroom. Between the two of us lay a massive chasm of $90,000. Yet that exact sum was the only thin thread tying us together. Slowly but surely my standard of living began to shift, and the most immediate glaring transformation happened during my daily meals. I completely stopped sneaking up to the 3rd floor just to scavenge for complimentary broth. Instead, I proudly walked up to the premium seafood station on the 2nd floor, boldly ordering a $25 plate of fresh shrimp over rice. The very first time I placed that extravagant order, even the lunch lady serving the food visibly froze in shock, giving me a incredibly I kept my face completely emotionless as I tapped my card to pay, carrying my loaded tray over to an isolated, quiet corner. The shrimp were plump, incredibly fresh, and packed with a perfect snap. I forced myself to eat with absolute slowness, relishing and thoroughly chewing every single bite. Moments later, Jangjae swaggered over with his massive luxury combo meal dropping down right across from me. Damn, Schwan, did you low-key hit the lottery or something? He stared down at my high-end shrimp bowl, his face a perfect picture of pure astonishment. Did you strike it rich? No, I replied flatly, keeping my head buried in my food. Then what's with the sudden glow-up? Bro, you are acting incredibly suspicious today. He leaned in closer across the table, drastically lowering his voice. Is this about what went down last night at the club? Just eat your food, I interjected sharply, cutting him off completely. Seeing that I was completely closed off and unwilling to spill any details, Jiangja simply shrugged his shoulders, smirked, and dropped the subject entirely, though every now and then he would still cast a bizarre calculating look in my direction. Down at the entrance of our dorm building, there was a trendy boba shop that I used to only ever stare at from afar while walking past. Now, like clockwork, every single afternoon I made it a point to walk inside and purchase their most affordable item, a refreshing $8 iced lemonade. Eventually, the underclassman girl working the cash register grew quite familiar with me. Hey, senior, getting your usual signature lemonade again today? Yeah, I replied softly, taking the plastic cup and walking slowly back to the dorms, making that single beverage stretch for an entire hour. The liquid was intensely tart, but it was accompanied by a subtle hint of sweetness. Over at the bookstore, right next to the university library, that comprehensive cutting-edge graduate exam preparation curriculum consisted of a massive 12-volume collection and carried an expensive price tag of exactly $880. I had gravitated toward that display and visited it countless times in the past, but every single time I could only afford to flip through the pages longingly. This time, however, I marched directly up to the main counter and confidently informed the shopkeeper that I would take the entire complete set. As the owner neatly boxed up the heavy volumes, I processed the payment, stepping out into the open air while tightly cradling the hefty stack of pristine new textbooks. The brilliant afternoon sunlight cascaded over my body, feeling incredibly warm and validating. I no longer had to wake up at the crack of dawn to aggressively fight for study desks in the library, nor did I have to meticulously copy down messy secondhand notes from older students. For the very first time in my academic career, I possessed my own premium weapons. When the weekend finally rolled around, my mother rang my phone once again, her fragile voice still heavily burdened with absolute despair. Juan, sweetie, regarding the house construction funds, your father tried to ask the neighbors for a loan again, but nobody is willing to help us. Mom, I interjected smoothly, cutting her off, tell him to stop begging. But if we don't borrow the cash, what else are we supposed to do? The site foreman is constantly hounding us for the payment. I have the money right here. An absolute dead silence fell over the other end of the line for a very long time, before my mother's voice cracked, completely trembling with a frantic, tearful panic. You have it. Where on earth did you manage to get that kind of massive cash, Juan? Please tell me you haven't gotten mixed up in something illegal or dangerous out there. Of course not, I reassured her, keeping my tone flawlessly steady and calm. The university administration just awarded me a prestigious high-tier academic scholarship. And when I combine that with the savings I accumulated from my part-time jobs, it totals exactly $20,000. A scholarship that incredibly massive. Yes, it's a top-tier national-level academic grant. I fabricated the lie effortlessly, my pulse remaining dead steady and my face completely unbothered. But if you give all of that to us, how are you going to survive and pay for your own meals? I have more than enough to cover myself. Just text me your bank account details, and I'll head directly over to the branch this afternoon. The moment I hung up the phone, I immediately marched into the bank and executed the wire transfer for the flat $20,000. As I stepped out of the heavy glass doors of the financial building, I could swear the expansive sky above looked noticeably brighter and more vibrant. With that, the very first major expense item listed in my planner notebook was successfully crossed off. From that day forward, I completely stopped wasting my energy on grueling private tutoring gigs, and I never again set foot in the chaotic cafeteria kitchen to wash dishes for pennies. Every single second of my waking life was aggressively reinvested into my academic career, practically living inside the library stacks, locking myself away in empty lecture halls for intensive self-study, and entirely immersing myself in professional reference manuals that were as thick as concrete bricks. Despite everything, Su Yuan and I still remained peers in the exact same university department. Whenever we attended the massive joint major lecture courses, she would always claim a spot in the absolute front row, while I purposefully kept my distance, sitting quietly in the very back row. And during our highly specialized, smaller seminar sessions, the professors would occasionally end up grouping us together into the exact same team. Yet she strictly avoided uttering a single word to me. And I absolutely never took the initiative to approach her either. On one specific occasion during a major workshop discussion, the class was required to split into pairs to collaborate on an extensive research project. The professor casually utilized a randomized system pairing me directly with her. Instantly, every single student in the room turned to lock their eyes on us, their faces twisted with sheer awkwardness. Ever since that infamous night at the KTV, the entire department had become fully aware that the elite heiress Su Yuan Yuan had casually dropped a staggering $90,000, essentially funding the single most impoverished guy in the entire class. Consequently, all sorts of wild, unhinged rumors began spreading like wildfire. Some factions claimed that the two of us were secretly hooking up in a toxic relationship, while others maliciously gossiped that I had officially become her private kept boy. Su Yuan Yuan, however, acted completely oblivious to the vicious hallway chatter. She merely locked her gaze onto me, addressing me in a strictly cold corporate tone. Which specific section are you going to take ownership of? I'll handle the final 3 data slides. I responded with flat compliance. The absolute second I finished my sentence, she immediately turned her back to consult with another student. Throughout the entire life cycle of the assignment, we maintained absolute radio silence. I independently scraped and verified all the underlying academic data, and I single-handedly built the entire presentation deck right up to the evening before the live showcase. I shot over the finalized polished project file to her inbox. She merely fired back a cold 2-word acknowledgement received. The following morning, we stood together on the main stage of the lecture hall. I seamlessly delivered my allocated dataset, while she took over to present her respective portion. Our execution wasn't flawlessly synchronized by any means, but it was completely error-free, prompting the professor to award our duo a highly competitive, excellent grade. As we stepped down from the podium, she arrogantly marched ahead, while I fell back quietly following behind her shadow. Just as she reached the exit door, she abruptly halted her stride, pivoting on her heel to face me with a flat expression, "Decent work." That marked the absolute first sentence she had directly spoken to me since that chaotic night, devoid of any genuine warmth or praise, serving as nothing more than a detached robotic performance review. "Just doing my part," I replied evenly. She offered a subtle dismissive nod, before turning around to exit the room entirely. Her departing silhouette carried the exact same aura as it did back in the VIP club, immensely proud, untouchable, and completely detached from reality. As if that staggering $90,000 sum truly meant nothing more to her than a petty arcade game. She had the luxury of not giving a damn. But to me, it was absolutely everything. I marched straight back to my dorm room, flipped open my dedicated 4-year plan notebook, and right on the inner title page directly next to Su Yuan Yuan's neatly written name, I firmly jotted down "Group Collaboration completed ×1", before aggressively crossing the entire line out with a heavy stroke. It was a calculated psychological ritual, a blunt reminder that between her and me, aside from cold hard cash, absolutely nothing else existed. By my second year of university, I successfully secured a top-tier national scholarship worth $8,000. I refused to touch a single cent of that cash, depositing the entire sum untouched directly into a separate secure bank account. This was completely unexpected revenue outside of my initial calculations, serving as the absolute launchpad fund for my ultimate debt repayment strategy. Meanwhile, I relentlessly executed every line of my strict 4-year blueprint, capping my monthly living budget at exactly $800, never allowing myself to go a single penny over or under the limit. I manually tracked every single transaction in a miniature ledger, maintaining absolute precision down to the very last cent. Buying a cheap pen for $1.50 logged, grabbing a standard meal for $12 logged, contribution for department dues for $20 logged. Zhangja constantly nagged that I was living my life exactly like a mindless AI drone. "Xuan, is it seriously that deep, bro? It's not like you're hurting for cash right now." He stared down at the dense financial tallies in my ledger, completely unable to comprehend my mindset. "What the hell are you even trying to prove here?" It was physically impossible for me to explain the reality to him. He couldn't possibly understand that, to me, those $90,000 weren't a luxury asset. They were a suffocating noose wrapped tightly around my neck, and the other end of that rope was held firmly in Su Yuan Yuan's manicured hand. My only option was to rely solely on my own strength, inch by grueling inch, to violently snap that leash, if I ever wanted to win back the absolute freedom to breathe. During the latter half of our sophomore year, the university administration organized the annual campus sports track event, imposing a mandatory recruitment quota on every single department. The class counselor was failing miserably to find a volunteer for the grueling 3,000-meter race, so Zhangja took it upon himself to sign my name up on the official roster. "Come on, Juan. Your entire routine is literally just running laps or locked inside the library stacks, so your stamina has got to be absolutely insane. Go bring home some clout for our department." I chose not to push back against the decision. Running track required absolutely zero investment, and it was a solid way to keep in peak physical condition. On the afternoon of the race, the heat was suffocating. Dressed in nothing but basic unbranded athletic shorts and a worn-out tank top, I took my position right at the edge of the starting grid. The starter pistol let out a deafening blast, and I immediately surged forward, pacing myself to a highly calculated personal rhythm. I wasn't chasing glory or podium finishes. My sole mission was simply to cross the finish line. By the time I entered the absolute final lap of the stadium, my physical reserves were entirely depleted. Blistering sweat poured down, completely blurring my vision, while my lungs burned as if filled with liquid fire. As my legs carried me directly past the main VIP spectator stands, I subconsciously lifted my heavy gaze to look straight toward Su Yuanyuan. She was seated right there. She was comfortably nestled among the elite student council executives, sporting their official varsity gear and wearing a chic sun hat. She seemed to be casually conversing with the person beside her, a faint, effortless smirk gracing her lips. Under the blinding sun, her flawless complexion practically glowed. She didn't glance at the racing track below, and she definitely didn't look at me. In her high society reality, this entire university sports meet was nothing but a thoroughly boring chore, which probably couldn't even compare to a single piece of trivial gossip shared with her wealthy peers. I instantly ripped my gaze away, gritting my teeth as I forced my legs forward, the exact moment I crossed the absolute final boundary line. My entire body completely shut down from pure exhaustion. I collapsed flat onto the rough track, and Zhang Zhe frantically sprinted over to prop me up, shoving a water bottle into my trembling hand. "Fourth place, Juan, you're an absolute beast. You were a literal hair away from a podium finish." I was desperately, violently gasping for oxygen, completely incapable of articulating a single word. Deep down, I could only feel that the insurmountable chasm separating me from Su Yuanyuan was exactly like this grueling 3,000-meter racing track. I was down in the dirt, bleeding my soul out just to make progress, completely drenched in sweat, looking utterly pathetic and wretched. Meanwhile, she would forever remain seated on that untouchable, high and mighty VIP grandstand, completely unbothered and detached. Later that night, back in the silence of my dorm room, I opened my strict 4-year planner notebook and firmly inked a new section heading Repayment Timeline. Initial seed capital, $8,000. Ultimate target, exactly $90,000. This goal was no longer a hollow, delusional pipe dream. I had finally laid down my very first concrete foundation block. Time continued to fly by in a relentless blur, and my daily existence mirrored a perfectly coded automated software script. Attending lectures, consuming basic meals, locking myself in the library stacks, and sleeping. I strictly boycotted any group social gatherings, and rarely bothered to make small talk with anyone. Most of my classmates had long since grown accustomed to my absolute solitary isolation. To them, Li Xuan was merely an overachieving student with insanely good grades, nothing more than an intimidating, detached freak. But only I knew the terrifying truth: I couldn't afford to stop running. I was terrified that the second I slowed down, the crushing weight of that astronomical debt would completely break me. When junior year finally rolled around, I managed to secure a spot assisting a prominent professor on a major research initiative, which brought in a modest monthly stipend of $500. Simultaneously, I aggressively weaponized my scarce spare hours between lectures by picking up various freelance programming and coding gigs across the web. It was a brutal, exhausting grind that routinely kept me awake until the dead of night. But like clockwork, every single month, my dedicated repayment fund would grow by an extra $1,000 to $2,000. Watching that financial tally steadily climb higher and higher was the only thing that granted me a faint, fleeting sense of true security. Meanwhile, Su Yuanyuan's high society existence seemed completely immune to change. She effortlessly remained the absolute epicenter of every crowd she stepped into, consistently draped in gorgeous designer apparel, and commuting to campus in luxury sports cars whose brands I couldn't even identify. We still maintained absolute radio silence between us, on the rare occasions our paths crossed on the campus walkways. Her elite gaze would casually sweep over my form, never lingering for more than a single fraction of a second. That brief glance looked exactly like someone recognizing a completely familiar stranger. I fully and calmly accepted this reality we were fundamentally never meant to occupy. The same social orbit in that $90,000 transaction was a chaotic anomaly, nothing more than a cold transactional arrangement. She aggressively spent her wealth to secure a shallow victory in a party game, while I traded away my raw pride and the next 4 years of my youthful existence, in exchange for a desperate lifeline to violently reshape my destiny. Right now, that exact transaction was still actively playing out, and I was bleeding myself dry to ensure I proved myself a worthy, formidable counterparty in this deal. In the blink of an eye, senior year crashed over us. The lecture load drastically lightened, and every single student began frantically scrambling to secure their future. Some locking themselves away for post-grad exams, others grinding for civil service slots, and the rest desperately hunting for entry-level corporate positions. The cramped hallways of the dormitory building were constantly echoing with the stressful hum of frantic phone calls and shaky, nervous interview practice sessions, occasionally punctured by the sound of muffled, anxious sobbing from dark corners. My own schedule was equally unforgiving. I was aggressively pulling all-nighters to finalize my graduation thesis, while simultaneously prepping for a relentless barrage of technical assessments and intense interviews with several Fortune-level tech conglomerates. My grand 4-year blueprint was finally approaching its absolute endgame. Inside my worn-out ledger notebook, every single penny spent over the years was documented with absolute mathematical precision. I had successfully squeezed every single drop of utility out of those $90,000. I had effectively weaponized that cash to aggressively upgrade my intellect, while utilizing it to safeguard a baseline level of human dignity. As for Su Yuan, she was apparently making arrangements to relocate overseas. At least that was the latest campus gossip Zhang Jie dropped on me. Her ultra-wealthy family mapped out her entire trajectory long ago. She's heading straight to an elite Ivy League university before immediately securing a prime spot on Wall Street. A literal born winner. Zhang Jie's voice was thoroughly dripping with immense envy. I offered a silent, slow nod, feeling absolutely no emotional response whatsoever. This was precisely the type of golden destiny that belonged to someone of her stature. On one completely ordinary afternoon, I packed up my things to exit the library and head back to the dorms. As my path took me directly past the campus artificial lake, my eyes caught a glimpse of a deeply familiar silhouette. It was Su Yuan. She was sitting entirely alone on a rustic bench positioned right by the water's edge, accompanied by zero entourage, and surrounded by absolutely none of her usual friends. She was wearing a surprisingly simple unbranded white summer dress, staring blankly into the murky rippling water in a daze. The cascading rays of the setting sun washed completely over her frame, wrapping her entire body in a soft, brilliant coat of shimmering gold. She didn't radiate her standard demeanor, completely shedding that icy, high and mighty armor she usually weaponized to keep people at a distance. Instead, she looked profoundly lonely, and perhaps even incredibly fragile. I instinctively halted my stride, concealing myself within the thick shadows of a nearby tree. I had absolutely no clue why someone like her would be isolating herself in a place like this. Perhaps her Ivy League applications had hit an unexpected roadblock, or maybe she had gotten into a massive fallout with her elite social circle. A barrage of endless theories instantly flashed through my mind, yet I couldn't verify a single one of them. She merely sat there in absolute haunting stillness, the gentle lakeside breeze softly catching and blowing her long hair across her face. After a few quiet minutes passed, she reached deep into her designer handbag to pull out a small object, which appeared to be a tiny antique wooden music box. She slowly wound the metallic key on the bottom, and a crisp, incredibly melancholic melody began echoing through the quiet air. It was the quad theme from Castle in the Sky. She gently cradled the tiny mechanism in the palms of her hands, keeping her head deeply bowed, completely frozen in place. From my vantage point, it was impossible to decipher the look on her face, but I could clearly sense an overwhelming wave of pure crushing sorrow, slowly radiating outward from her entire being. This was a version of Su Yuan I had never even imagined existed. In every single one of my memories, she was permanently flawless, blindingly brilliant, and utterly invincible. She was someone who could casually throw away 90,000 grand without batting an eye, and someone who could remain entirely emotionless, while executing a mandatory academic collaboration alongside a broke nobody like me. She had always resembled a completely heartless, flawless marble masterpiece. Yet right now, that pristine aesthetic seemed to crack wide open. My mind suddenly drifted back to our freshman year, to the exact moment she executed that massive wire transfer to me, looking up to utter a bet's a bet with an expression that was entirely flat, cold, and detached. Yet in the absolute depths of her eyes, there was a faint trace of something hidden that I, at the time, couldn't possibly comprehend. What on earth was it? I had absolutely no clue. I remained frozen beneath the shadow of that tree for an eternity, waiting until the twilight sky completely surrendered to the pitch-black night, and the lakeside streetlights flickered to life. Only then did Su Yuan pack away her music box, rise from the bench, and slowly wander away into the dark. From start to finish, she remained entirely oblivious to my presence. The moment I stepped back into my dorm room, I uncharacteristically refused to flip open my financial ledger, nor did I bother checking my strict debt repayment schedule. Instead, I just sat at my desk locked in a profound daze for hours, my mind completely hijacked by the haunting image of Su Yuan by the lake, and the echoing melancholic melody of Castle in the Sky. For the very first time, it finally dawned on me that Su Yuan might not actually be as bulletproof as she forced the world to believe. Deep within her ultra-luxurious golden reality, she likely shouldered her own agonizing burdens and crushing isolation. That $90,000 sum might have been absolute pocket change to her, but that specific chaotic game of truth or dare, and that icy declaration of a bet's a bet, what did those actions truly mean to her soul? For the absolute first time, I began to genuinely ponder this lingering question. Yet any realistic answer remained completely out of reach. Between her world and mine lay a massive, insurmountable societal chasm that I could never hope to cross. The single absolute objective left within my control was to finalize our unspoken transaction as rapidly as possible, before completely wiping my existence from her reality forever. I booted up my laptop and aggressively began optimizing my resume, Corporate interview invitations would be flooding my inbox any day now, and I absolutely had to secure the single most elite offer available. Graduation day continued to barrel toward us like a freight train. Ultimately, I managed to lock down an elite position at a top-tier national tech conglomerate. The entry-level salary and executive benefits package completely shattered my loftiest expectations. The afternoon I signed the contract, I walked out of that corporate skyscraper, standing beneath the blinding sun as I let out a massive lung-emptying sigh of relief. 4 agonizing years of intense suppression and ruthless grinding had finally paid off in full. The absolute first thing I did was dial my family home, eager to break the monumental news to my mother. The second the words left my lips, she burst into hysterical tears on the other end of the line, repeating a single breathless sentence like a sacred mantra, "You made it." My boy finally made it out of the trenches, so. Hearing her weep, my own eyes wellingly welled up with hot, stubborn tears. Later that evening, I retreated back into the quiet of my dorm room, flipping directly to the very back of my 4-year plan notebook. The ultimate page served as my comprehensive financial wrap-up. Initial venture capital injection exactly $90,000. Total academic tuition fees $15,000. Total strict living expenses $36,800. Total specialized curriculum textbooks and material costs $4,800. Total emergency family infrastructure support $20,000, leaving a remaining buffer of $1,300. Aggregated gross expenditure precisely $77,900. But these figures merely represented the absolute core columns of my ledger. The countless miniature everyday transactional costs had been meticulously tracked separately in a secondary pocket booklet. Across 4 long years, I had successfully milked that $90,000 down to the absolute bone, logging onto my banking app to cross-reference my available liquidity. Out of that initial balance of $90,088.82, there was now a mere 82 cents sitting in the account. Like a flawless piece of code, absolutely everything had aligned with my roadmap for a perfect execution. I firmly snapped the cover of the notebook shut, allowing this dense archive that encapsulated 4 years of raw youth, suppressed humiliation, and absolute relentless grinding to officially complete its grim mission. Meanwhile, inside my dedicated high-yield escrow repayment account, I had already aggressively amassed over $30,000 in raw cash. Sure, the remaining milestone to hit that absolute 90,000 mark was still a massive hill to climb. But now that I was armed with a lucrative recession-proof corporate salary and possessed undeniable financial leverage, crossing the finish line was nothing more than a simple waiting game. The morning of the graduation ceremony brought a flawlessly clear, radiant sky. The entire campus was flooded with students draped in black academic gowns and caps, aggressively posing for final commemorative photos to lock in their college memories. Every single corner of the university grounds was vibrating with manic laughter, tearful embraces, and long-winded goodbyes. Yet I remained a total ghost, an absolute bystander, standing completely isolated and detached outside the festive crowds. I hadn't bothered to cultivate a massive social circle. Even Jangja, the single guy I actually considered a true friend, had signed an employment contract back in his hometown region and was scheduled to board a cross-country train that very afternoon. My eyes frantically scanned the venue, but I couldn't locate Su Yuanyuan anywhere. Throughout the entire grueling morning, her unmistakable figure was completely missing from the ocean of faces. Perhaps she hadn't even bothered to show up today. After all, to an elite heiress occupying her stratosphere, a standard university graduation ceremony carried absolutely zero significance or prestige. Deep down, I couldn't tell if I was genuinely disappointed or immensely relieved. I had rehearsed this exact moment for a very long time, desperately wanting to look her in the eyes today and offer a sincere thank you, while firmly assuring her that every single cent would be paid back in full. Yet I couldn't even track her down. Just as I finally resolved to turn around and leave the campus, a familiar voice cut through the air directly behind me, Li Xuan. I snapped my head around violently. It was Su Yuanyuan. She was also fully draped in the official graduation gown, her long dark hair cascading elegantly over her shoulders, enhanced by subtle minimalist makeup. She looked breathtakingly beautiful. She stood entirely alone, maintaining a short distance from me. As she locked her eyes onto mine, "Congratulations." "Same to you," she offered. "You too," I replied, feeling my throat tighten as my voice turned incredibly scratchy. "I heard you locked down a corporate offer," she inquired. "Yeah." I nodded. "I did." "That's great." She gave a slight subtle nod, her face remaining entirely neutral and unreadable. Just like that, an awkward, suffocating silence blanketed the space between us. The rest of the world was buzzing, crowds constantly flowing past, exploding with celebratory noise and chaotic laughter. Yet the two of us stood there completely paralyzed, looking exactly like a muted slow-motion cinematic shot. I desperately wanted to open my mouth and address the elephant in the room, the massive debt. I wanted to pull up my bank app and display that $30,000 balance to her, eager to lay out the exact logistics of my aggressive reimbursement timeline. But just as the words swirled to the tip of my tongue, I forced myself to swallow them back down. Standing right in front of an elite heiress destined for Wall Street, with my newly acquired entry-level corporate salary. And my pathetic little repayment schedule just looked incredibly laughable to her. I absolutely refused to stand before her once again, and expose my underlying financial insecurity and lowborn status. But right as I prepared to force out a generic line of small talk, she preempted me speaking first while I'm officially leaving. Heading out to the States. Yeah. Have a safe flight out there. He offered flatly. She cast a long, lingering look at me, her gaze incredibly intense and deep. Li Xuan. She suddenly called out my full name. You really don't need to pay that money back. I froze completely in absolute shock. That was cash I legally forfeited because I lost a dare. It has absolutely nothing to do with you. The moment the words left her lips, she paused for a beat, before quietly adding another line. Besides, you've already relied on your own strength to secure the exact future you were chasing, haven't you? The absolute second those words left her lips, she turned on her heel and glided away without waiting for my response. I stood paralyzed, watching her perfect silhouette instantly melt into the chaotic sea of people, drifting further and further out of my reach. A sleek, pitch-black luxury sedan was waiting right outside the campus gates. She slipped inside, and within seconds, the vehicle completely vanished from sight. I remained rooted to the exact same spot, frozen for an absolute eternity without moving an inch. My fingers tightly gripped my newly minted graduation diploma and degree certificates, their physical weight feeling incredibly heavy and real in my hands. She casually claimed I didn't need to reimburse her. She claimed that I had already won this brutal game. Yet inside my chest, I only felt a sudden massive wave of pure emptiness. Our unspoken contract had been completely unilaterally terminated by her whim. She hadn't even granted me a single chance to clear my conscience and settle the score. The invisible leash connecting her world to mine. The exact rope I had spent 4 grueling years bleeding to violently snap had been effortlessly severed by a casual, dismissive wave of her hand. I felt exactly like a desperate fighter throwing an absolute powerhouse punch with all his might, only to strike thin air crashing into soft cotton. It left me feeling entirely powerless, lost, and completely dazed. 4 years of my life had officially concluded, and whatever twisted story existed between me and Su Yuan Yuan had seemingly ended too. At least that was the massive delusion I believed. On the absolute first day of my corporate onboarding, the HR manager guided me through the facility, showcasing the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows. Outside the glass lay a sprawling jungle of sharp metallic skyscrapers peering the clouds, where every single individual sprinted with frantic urgency, their expressions a volatile mix of elite exhaustion and manic adrenaline. The crisp air inside the corporate office practically reeked of high-dose caffeine and pure unadulterated capital. This specific atmosphere felt hauntingly familiar to the vibes inside the Golden Palace KT Vive 4 years ago. Yet it was simultaneously a completely different animal. Over there, the money was pure decadence, nothing more than a shallow playground. Here, the money was the ultimate objective, the raw fuel driving the entire machine. I adapted to this cutthroat environment almost instantly, or rather, I executed a completely seamless transition from the exact ruthless survival mode I perfected during my 4 years at university. Intensely disciplined, hyper-efficient, and relentlessly goal-oriented. While the rest of the team clocked in at 9 in the morning, I was already at my desk by 8, while everyone else bolted out the door at 6. I consistently clocked overtime until the absolute dead of night. My corporate peers quickly labeled me the ultimate grind lord. Initially, it was thrown around as a sarcastic joke, but it rapidly morphed into pure unadulterated fear and respect. I couldn't care less about their petty workplace politics, while they aggressively chased promotions and raises, fat year-end bonuses, and lucrative corporate stock options. The single solitary metric I was hunting down was a specific number: 90,000 grand. I officially opened up a brand new, completely isolated bank account. The absolute millisecond my corporate salary hit my main account, I would immediately subtract my baseline minimal living expenses, before aggressively dumping every single leftover dollar straight into that secondary vault. I no longer subjected myself to the extreme, suffocating $800 lifestyle ceiling from my chaotic university days. Yet I still maintained an incredibly intense, frugal operational routine. I completely boycotted luxury designer goods, and strictly refused to waste my energy on toxic superficial networking events. My solitary escape was hitting the heavy iron racks at the elite gym right beneath our office building. My entire reality was mapped out like a perfectly calculated, hyper-focused straight line. 1 year into the corporate grind, I solidified my status as the absolute backbone of our division. By year 2, I was independently spearheading a multi-million-dollar flagship project, which easily secured me a massive 6-figure annual performance bonus. By year 3, I officially leveled up to a senior project director, actively commanding an entire elite team of developers. And inside that dedicated escrow repayment fund, the underlying balance had long since shattered the initial 90,000 milestone. I went as far as referencing the absolute peak commercial wealth management index. to meticulously calculate the compounding interest that accrued across those exact years, adjusting the grand total to a clean definitive sum of $120,000. The capital was fully liquid and ready to be deployed, but my high society creditor was completely nowhere to be found. Ever since graduation day, Su Yuan had seemingly vanished from the face of the earth. I made several low-key attempts to track down her whereabouts. I scoured the absolute depths of every single mainstream social media matrix, yet I failed to locate a single digital footprint under her name. I eventually brought it up during a call with Jiang Jie, but he was completely clueless as well. Bro, she migrated straight to the elite circles of the United States. She occupies an entirely different universe than a couple of working class guys like us. How the hell could we ever maintain a connection with someone like that? Jiang Jie sighed through the phone speaker. He had officially retreated back to his rural hometown, securing a highly stable structured position at a local government agency, living a completely predictable 9-to-5 existence, and actively prepping to settle down for marriage. We still touch base every now and then, but our conversations were strictly confined to mundane everyday life updates. The name Su Yuan had essentially transformed into an untouchable taboo, never to be spoken aloud by anyone again. I kept that flat $120,000 locked securely inside that card, leaving it completely untouched. It sat there like a cold, heavy marble monument, immortalizing that agonizing era of my impoverished, pride-shattered youth, while serving as a permanent, unachievable questline. A constant psychological warning that I still owed a massive debt to someone. By the 4th year, I successfully dropped a massive down payment on a luxury apartment in the heart of this sprawling metropolis, purchasing a modest but highly strategic apartment with a breathtaking panoramic view. I eventually bought myself a car as well. It wasn't an exotic luxury hypercar by any means, but it was more than enough to grant me a private, completely mobile steel sanctuary to navigate through the endless veins of this gargantuan metropolis. Standing directly in front of my own floor-to-ceiling glass window, I quietly stared out at the sprawling sea of city lights twinkling in the dark. I had successfully established a high-powered career, complete with my own real estate and private transportation. By any conventional mainstream societal metrics, I had officially achieved immense success. I had finally forced my reality to align with the absolute dream profile I used to lust it after back when I was broke. Yet that profound agonizing void left deep inside my soul by the ghost of Su Yuan refused to be filled by any amount of material wealth. I occasionally caught myself wondering how she was holding up out in the United States. Would an intensely proud high-born princess like her manage to foster a brand new elite social circle in an entirely foreign country? Was she still playing chaotic games of truth or dare at high-end venues? And did she still possess that effortless, terrifying power to completely rewrite the entire life trajectory of an impoverished nobody on a petty whim? I had absolutely no answers. The only absolute certainty I possessed was that if I failed to track her down, this unpayable debt would shadow my existence until the day I died. Then, on a completely ordinary Friday evening, our old university WeChat alumni group, which had been entirely dead for years, suddenly erupted with a massive barrage of notifications. The former class president pinned an official announcement to the feed stating that he was coordinating an official 4-year university reunion for the upcoming weekend, locking in the venue at the premium buffet lounge of an ultra-luxury 5-star hotel. The chat matrix instantly went hyperactive, user spamming, "Damn, it's already been 4 years. Shout out to the president for stepping up. Count me in. Everyone currently in the city better show up. No excuses." I quietly observed the flashing profile icons and cascading text blocks, feeling absolutely zero desire to participate. My current daily routine and high-stakes lifestyle shared virtually zero common ground with my old university peers anymore. Attending these events was nothing more than a toxic flexing contest. A shallow arena for people to boast about their salary figures and titles. I refused to squander my precious time on such superficial nonsense. But right as my thumb hovered to close out the WeChat application, Zhangji's private chat window abruptly popped onto my screen. "Yo, Xuan Yu hitting up the reunion." "Pass," I fired back flatly. "Come on, bro." He immediately countered, "You gotta pull up, it's literally been 4 long years. Let's go see how the old squad is doing." Word on the street is that even Li Jia is making an appearance this time. That arrogant clown is low-key printing cash right now. He apparently launched his own independent startup corporate entity. The name Li Jia felt exactly like a jagged thorn, instantly piercing and triggering my rawest nerves. Back during that infamous night at the KTV, he was the exact one who utilized that incredibly patronizing, venomous tone to propose that humiliating $90,000 gamble, permanently pinning me to a pillar of pure shame. "You should go." I texted, "I've got a killer weekend shift." I manufactured a generic corporate excuse. "Stop capping, bro." Zhangzhou shot back instantly, "You're literally an executive director now. There is absolutely no way you need to grind 24/7. Just pull up, I haven't seen your face in ages." And I literally booked a flight from our hometown just for this. Faced with that, I was completely out of options to decline. On the afternoon of the reunion, I navigated my vehicle into the luxury hotel lot. The entire parking structure was utterly packed with elite supercars, BMWs, high-end Mercedes, and sleek Porsches. I purposefully tucked my modest car away into a secluded corner, feeling a sudden haunting sensation that I was still that exact same impoverished student stepping into the decadent, blinding lights of the Golden Palace Club. The only stark difference this time around was that I was armored in a perfectly tailored shutter designer suit, possessing more than enough cold cash in my bank account to effortlessly cover the bill for this extravagantly expensive dining event. The private banquet hall was already overflowing with people, with a good majority of my former classmates looking noticeably altered by time, either packing on weight or battling receding starting hairlines. The moment I crossed the threshold into the room, several individuals instantly shot up from their seats, greeting me with manic enthusiasm. Holy crap, Li Xuan's here. Look at you, corporate big shot. Yeah. Director Li, absolute honor to have you here. The exact same peers who used to treat me like an invisible ghost during our university days were now plastering their faces with incredibly warm, desperate to impress smiles. I returned their energy with polite professional pleasantries, quickly securing a low-key seat in an isolated corner. True to the rumors, Li Ju was dominating the center of the room, draped entirely in loud designer streetwear and flaunting gold-rimmed glasses. He looked the absolute part of a pretentious corporate hustle bro. Spotting my entry, he took the initiative to swagger over swirling a premium wine glass. Li Xuan. Damn, it's been a minute. Word on the street is you're low-key running the entire show over at that tech conglomerate, huh? I'm managing fine, I replied with flat indifference. Aw, don't be so humble, man. He aggressively clinked his glass against mine, causing a sharp ring. Out of our entire graduating class, the only ones pulling real power right now are you and Sue. Actually, scratch that. It's literally just you at the top now. He purposefully dangled her name out there, before cutting himself off with a smug, calculated grin. I merely locked my eyes onto his face, maintaining absolute silence. As the alcohol flowed freely through the night, everyone's psychological filters completely dissolved. People eagerly began rehashing old college memories and inside jokes. And inevitably, the conversation drifted back toward the legendary scandals of our youth. Out of nowhere, someone brought up Su Yuanyuan's name once again. Speaking of which, how is our absolute department goddess Su Yuanyuan holding up these days? I bet she's already printing money as a high-powered Wall Street executive in the States, right? The moment those words echoed through the room, the chaotic, noisy private banquet hall instantly fell dead silent. Everyone began exchanging glances, their expressions shifting into something incredibly tense and awkward. Li Jia took a slow, deliberate sip of his luxury wine, letting out a cynical, mocking sneer. Wall Street executive. Are you clowns seriously living in a total fantasy world? One of the girls turned to face Li Jia, her eyes wide with curiosity. Wait, do you actually possess some classified insider tea on this? Li Jia clearly relished the spotlight, soaking in the fact that he was the center of attention. He arrogantly cleared his throat before dropping a bomb. Her family empire went fully bankrupt ages ago. None of you had a single clue, did you? Total bankruptcy, are you for real right now? Instantly, shockwaves rippled through every single person in the room. It's absolute facts. Li Jia replied, his tone dripping with an unmistakable, malicious sense of schadenfreude. It happened about 2 years ago, if I recall correctly. Her old man made a string of catastrophic investments and got violently scammed, completely rupturing their corporate cash flow and drowning them in an unpayable mountain of debt. Word on the street is it totaled up to hundreds of millions. Hundreds of millions. Someone in the back sharply inhaled a breath of cold air. Then what the hell happened to Su Yuanyuan? Oh, her elitist parents were incredibly calculated and slick. They packed up and fled the country under the cover of night, escaping overseas. They're literally still on the government's active wanted fugitives list right now. But it sucks to be our precious little Princess Yuanyuan though. She was entirely abandoned to take the fall and face the wrath of all their creditors alone. Li Jia casually threw his hands up, his face completely devoid of even a single shred of genuine human empathy. Just a while back I caught wind that the Supreme Court officially liquidated and auctioned off every single asset tied to her name. She's officially blacklisted as a high-risk debt dodger now, meaning she can't even legally book a high-speed train ticket, let alone a flight. Damn, talk about a brutal karma check. Tables really do turn. The banquet room instantly transformed into a desolate graveyard of silence. Everyone thoroughly paralyzed, unable to articulate a single syllable after absorbing the news. I felt the warm blood inside my veins instantly turn to ice, while a violent, deafening static noise began ringing through my ears. Whatever unhinged garbage Li Ji babbled about next, I failed to process a single word. The only reality crashing down on my mind was that Su Yuanyuan was entirely ruined. That pristine, untouchable girl who once radiated like the blinding sun. The absolute angel who casually tossed $90,000 to save my entire existence from the trenches had officially fallen from grace. I violently shot up from my seat, the legs of my chair aggressively screeching against the floor tiles, creating a jarring noise. Every single eye in the room instantly locked onto me. I uttered absolutely nothing to the stunned crowd, pivoting instantly on my heel to walk out. I marched straight out of the luxury hotel, and even though the freezing night air violently whipped against my face, I was too emotionally numb to feel a single shred of the cold. I threw myself into the driver's seat of my car, both hands gripping the steering wheel with a white-knuckled intensity, completely paralyzed as to where I should even drive. A single all-consuming obsession completely hijacked my brain. I had to track her down. I absolutely must find her, no matter the cost. I began searching for her like an absolute madman. For the very first time in 4 long years, I aggressively leveraged every single connection and resource at my disposal. I hired elite private investigators to hunt for any trace of her current location, while concurrently begging the legal compliance team at my corporate firm to sift through the public digital court records database, to flag any active debt foreclosure and bankruptcy litigations tied directly to her name. Slowly but surely, the scattered puzzle pieces of data began trickling in. Every single word that rolled out of Lee Jae's mouth was absolute horrifying facts, and the grim reality was actually infinitely worse than he described. Her father's business empire had been completely liquidated through a brutal bankruptcy court, and because she had signed on as one of the primary financial guarantors, the state handed down a judgment, holding her entirely liable for joint and several debt obligations. The luxury real estate assets registered under her name, her personal vehicles, and every single one of her private liquid banking funds were frozen and aggressively auctioned off to satisfy the furious demands of creditors. Yet that massive liquidation was nothing more than a drop in an ocean of debt. She was officially thrown onto the state's high-risk blacklisted defaulters roster, publicly branded as a high-risk debt dodger. The state slapped her with severe high-consumption lifestyle bans, legally prohibiting her from booking commercial flights or boarding high-speed bullet trains, and barring her from checking into even basic star-rated hotels. An invisible, suffocating web of legal restrictions had effectively trapped and buried her alive at the absolute rock bottom of this urban jungle. The absolute final update the private investigator managed to unearth for me was that roughly 6 months ago, she was renting out a cramped, decrepit basement unit located inside a decaying residential slum. But eventually, because she fell entirely short on her monthly rent payments, the ruthless landlord aggressively evicted her onto the streets. Following that incident, her digital and physical trail went completely dark. The entire investigation hit a concrete wall right then and there. I parked my vehicle directly outside the rusting gates of that decaying apartment block, staring down at the pitch-black, moisture-choked entrance of that underground basement for an agonizingly long time. My mind completely fractured trying to comprehend exactly how Su Yuan managed to survive, falling from the absolute peak of high society directly into this wretched, muddy trench. And I couldn't even begin to fathom how she had single-handedly carried the crushing weight of this entire nightmare all on her own. Throughout the subsequent agonizing months, I practically transformed into a restless ghost, haunting and scouring every bleak, hidden corner of this concrete jungle. The second my office shift ended, I completely stopped going back to my apartment, opting instead to cruise my vehicle through the absolute darkest zones where the displaced and homeless routinely sought refuge. Underpass bridges, deserted public parks, subway terminal exits, and neon-lit 24-hour fast food diners. Every single time my eyes locked onto a frail, slender female silhouette, my heart would violently clench into a tight knot of sheer anxiety. Yet, without fail, every single attempt ended in crushing disappointment. A terrifying paranoia began creeping into my mind, whispering that I was destined to never cross paths with her ever again. Perhaps she had already fled the state to escape her creditors entirely. Or maybe she wasn't even alive anymore. That specific dark thought sent a violent chill rippling down my spine. It all came to a head on a brutal, biting winter night. The cold was absolutely merciless, and I had just emerged from the office, after finally wrapping up a grueling week-long isolated software deployment lockdown. I was thoroughly running on fumes, completely shattered in mind and body. The dashboard clock already read 1 o'clock in the morning, as I navigated my car down the eerie, completely abandoned streets. Just as I approached a massive highway overpass bridge, a multi-car rear-end collision blocked the entire main road ahead. Left with no choice, I veered onto the service road to detour directly beneath the massive bridge structures. Beneath these concrete highway overpasses, there was always a tragic gathering of completely homeless, forgotten souls huddling together just to survive the freezing nights. They weaponized thin cardboard sheets and tattered stained quilts to construct a chaotic line of pathetic makeshift shanties. I crawled my car forward at a snail's pace, my bright high beams scanning over those shivering, tightly curled bodies. My emotional state long since rendered completely numb by the repetition. But right as the vehicle's illumination was about to sweep past the absolute final shanty, my entire body instantly locked up into a state of sheer paralysis. There was a figure lying down inside that specific shelter, swallowed entirely by a filthy, shredded, oversized military winter coat, curling their entire frame into a tight, desperate ball. On the surface, they looked completely indistinguishable from the rest of the tragic crowd. However, poking straight out from beneath those disgusting, grease-stained blankets was a single exposed foot. That foot was wearing a cheap, completely worn-out canvas sneaker, and even though it was thoroughly caked in mud, making the original color impossible to identify. I recognized that specific design layout instantly. It was the exact bottom-tier bargain model I had seen stacked high in the discount shops of the university town, an absolute infinite number of times during my broke student days. The elite high society Su Yuan Yuan would have never allowed such a cheap shoe to touch her skin. Yet my heart instantly began thumping against my ribs with an unexplainable chaotic ferocity. I instantly veered my car toward the curb, killing the engine before stepping out into the darkness. The icy winter wind sliced against my bare skin like a sharpened blade, as I forced myself forward one heavy step at a time toward that motionless silhouette. The entire surroundings were hauntingly desolate, vibrating with nothing but the howling gale and the violent thumping of my own chest. I finally arrived directly in front of that makeshift shanty, slowly dropping down onto my knees in the dirt, aided by the dim, sickly amber glow of a distant street lamp. I managed to scan the face hidden beneath the tattered blankets. Her face was thoroughly caked in filth, her once gorgeous hair now tangled and knotted like dead withered grass. Her cheeks had hollowed out drastically from severe malnutrition, her lips chapped and splitting apart. Yet that unmistakably familiar facial structure, and those tightly closed eyes that still held a trace of unyielding defiance, belonged to her. It was genuinely, truly her. Su Yuan Yuan. My lungs instantly forgot how to process oxygen, and it felt as though a massive, heavy sledgehammer had slammed violently straight into the center of my chest, leaving me too paralyzed by raw agony to utter a single sound. Sensing a presence hovering over her shelter, her fragile frame suddenly stirred, her eyelids trembling ever so slightly, as she struggled with immense effort to pry open a narrow slit. Those eyes that were once breathtakingly crystal clear and radiant, the ones that used to regard me with a mix of curious amusement and high-born detachment, currently held nothing but a bottomless abyss of sheer exhaustion and emptiness. She stared up at me, her gaze entirely out of focus, her fractured mind seemingly unable to comprehend the reality before her. I locked my eyes onto her shivering form, absorbing the absolute confusion swirling deep within her pupils. And then I slowly extended my arm out toward her, opening my palm wide. It was a complete mirror of what she had done for me 4 years ago during our university graduation ceremony, radiating an absolute undeniable aura of calm assurance. I heard my own steady voice pierce through the biting winter wind, delivering a crystal clear message straight to her ears. Will you come with me? Her pupils instantly constricted with absolute violence, the dead emptiness in her gaze completely shattered and replaced by overwhelming shock and pure unadulterated disbelief. She locked her eyes onto my face with a death grip, before shifting her gaze down to my waiting, open hand. In the very next fraction of a second, those dim, lifeless eyes erupted with massive, heavy teardrops, surging rapidly down her grime-stained hollow cheeks. Her tears resembled an ancient, long-frozen glacier that had finally reached its breaking point, melting entirely in this solitary moment, as her emotional defense system silently collapsed into ruins. There was no dramatic wailing, and no heavy, breathless sobbing. They merely cascaded in complete haunting silence, washing directly through the layers of thick grime on her skin, and carving distinct tear-streaked pathways down her face. I didn't press her for an immediate answer, nor did I break the silence with useless words. We simply remained locked in that position, one of us crouching, the other lying down, facing off beneath that concrete overpass amid the biting, razor-sharp winter winds. The entire universe felt as though it had been violently muted, leaving absolutely nothing but the distant, sporadic screech of passing car tires echoing over the asphalt, and her quiet, desperate weeping that was almost entirely swallowed up by the howling gale. After an eternity, I slowly pushed myself up to a stand, unbuttoned my ultra-expensive tailored cashmere overcoat, and leaned down to gently drape it over her frail, shivering frame. The fabric still radiated a pocket of my own body heat, carrying the distinct, sophisticated scent of my high-end woody cologne. This sudden wave of luxury warmth and clean fragrance collided violently with the rancid, moisture-choked stench clinking to her clothes, creating a staggering, heartbreaking contrast. Her entire body violently flinched at the contact, as if she had been physically scorched, and her tears began streaming down with an even more chaotic intensity. She desperately tried to push the expensive coat away, but she was utterly drained of strength. Her arm barely made it halfway up before collapsing powerlessly back down. I absolutely refused to grant her the luxury of rejecting me. Dropping back down into a crouch, I utilized an absolute non-negotiable grip to take hold of her freezing, trembling arm, steadily pulling her out from that nest of disgusting tattered bedding. She was horrifyingly light, feeling exactly like a hollow feather. I essentially had to wrap my arms entirely around her frame, just to keep her structurally compromised, collapsing body upright. She stumbled blindly into me, every solitary step forward requiring an agonizing amount of physical exertion. From the dark depths of that concrete underpass to the curb where my vehicle idled, the distance spanned no more than a few dozen meters, yet traversing it felt like an endless, grueling marathon. I popped the door open, carefully guiding her into the premium leather passenger seat. She instantly curled into a tight ball inside the massive bucket seat, looking devastatingly smaller and more malnourished than before. My oversized executive overcoat swallowed her frame entirely, making her look exactly like a neglected child who had stolen an adult's clothes. I firmly snapped the passenger door shut, slid into the driver's seat, and immediately cranked the vehicle's climate control system to its absolute maximum. The second the blast of hot air hit her skin, her body began violently, uncontrollably shuddering all over again, her teeth chattering together with a sharp metallic clicking sound. It was the violent shock of a body subjected to prolonged sub-zero hypothermia, abruptly crashing into a wave of intense heat. I didn't ask him for a destination, nor did I press him about the absolute hell he had endured over the last few years. I simply shifted into drive smoothly, merging the vehicle into the midnight traffic. He maintained absolute deafening silence, turning his head to stare blankly at the neon city lights blurring past the window. Those dazzling, ultra-bright displays reflected deeply within his vacant eyes, yet they failed to trigger even a single flicker of life. He looked exactly like a hollow shell whose soul had been violently ripped away, completely detached from this prosperous, luxurious reality that used to belong to him, unable to muster a single shred of interest in it ever again. The car smoothly descended into the underground parking garage of my apartment complex. I killed the engine, stepped out, and walked around to the passenger side to throw the door open for him. "We're here," I said softly, but he didn't budge, remaining entirely frozen in that exact same posture, staring into the dark. I waited with absolute, unyielding patience. After an eternity, he slowly, stiffly turned his head to lock eyes with me, his gaze completely filled with a thick confusion and deep uncertainty. Once again, I extended my open hand toward him, offering the exact same gesture I had made beneath the freezing bridge. This time, he visibly hesitated for a tense fraction of a second, before finally taking his trembling hand, which was completely caked in filth and covered in tiny bleeding cuts, and gently, frailly dropping it into the center of my palm. I gripped it firmly, guiding him out of the vehicle and straight into the elevator lobby. The pristine, polished chrome mirrors lining the elevator walls cast a ruthlessly sharp reflection of our two contrasting figures side by side. One was armored in a perfectly tailored executive suit with an immaculate upright posture, the literal blueprint of a Lahasia Chamarita Paiso Solieti modern corporate. The other was draped in tattered rags, looking completely emaciated and deathly pale, resembling a displaced refugee who had accidentally stumbled into a foreign dimension. It was utterly surreal, yet brutally real. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner to unlock my front door, allowing the warm ambient light of my apartment to flood over us. My living space wasn't massively sprawling, but I had maintained it to be absolutely spotless, a pristine sanctuary, draped in minimalist, modern Scandinavian interior design. Every single item was arranged with absolute mathematical precision. Su Yuan froze at the threshold, paralyzed with fear, not daring to step inside. He kept his head deeply bowed, staring down at his feet, at those cheap canvas sneakers whose original color had been completely swallowed by mud, and then glanced toward the immaculate polished hardwood flooring. Instinctively, he tried to pull his foot back out into the hallway, but I cut him off. "Come on in," I insisted quietly. I reached into the entryway cabinet to pull out a brand new, unworn pair of slippers, placing them directly in front of his shivering feet. With immense hesitation, he slipped out of his shoes, his stiff robotic movements trailing closely behind me as we stepped into the living room. I pointed my finger directly toward the bathroom. "Go take a hot shower. The running hot water is already turned on, and you'll find fresh towels along with clean clothes waiting inside the cabinet." Since I obviously didn't keep any women's apparel in my apartment, I had to rummage through my wardrobe to pull out a pristine, brand new set of matching pure cotton streetwear. Moving like a completely hypnotized android, she silently obeyed and stepped inside the bathroom. Moments later, the heavy echoing sound of rushing water vibrated through the door. I walked into the kitchen and threw the refrigerator wide open, revealing shelves heavily packed with various imported gourmet ingredients, premium milk, high-grade Wagyu steaks, and fresh organic fruits and vegetables. Yet, I was completely at a loss as to what I should actually prepare for her. Her severely starved stomach likely couldn't handle anything dense right now. Ultimately, I scooped out a single small bowl of raw white rice from the storage bin, washed it thoroughly, and dumped it straight into a traditional clay pot, setting the burner to a low flame to slowly simmer a pot of plain, comforting congee. The sound of the shower running persisted for an agonizingly long time, so long in fact that a terrifying anxiety gripped me, making me wonder if she had completely collapsed or suffered some medical emergency inside. Just as I was about to lose my composure and march over to pound on the door, the rushing water abruptly ceased. Another 10 agonizing minutes trickled past. Before the bathroom door was slowly frailly cracked open from within, she stepped out into the light. Her soaking wet hair draped heavily over her slender shoulders, and she was enveloped in my ridiculously oversized matching sportswear. The pant legs were miles too long for her petite frame, bagging loosely and stacking awkwardly over her ankles. Her entire existence looked as though it had been scrubbed clean by the water, revealing her raw, unaltered state underneath. She was pale, but it was a ghostly bloodless and sickeningly translucent white. She was devastatingly emancipated, her high cheekbones jutted out sharply. Her eyes were deeply sunken into their sockets, and her chin was sharp enough to be genuinely terrifying. That face, which once overflowed with aristocratic pride and blinding radiance, currently possessed nothing but a shattering aura of absolute trauma and fragility. She couldn't bring herself to meet my gaze, keeping her head deeply bowed while her hands anxiously, frantically twisted the hem of her shirt. I ladled the freshly simmered congee into a ceramic bowl and set it down on the dining table, gently sliding it directly in front of her. Get some food in your system. My voice remained perfectly level and soothing. She lifted her gaze to stare intently at the steaming bowl of hot rice porridge, and then looked back at me, those eyes which had just been softened by the hot steam of the shower instantly welled up with a fresh cascade of tears. One drop, then another splashed with absolute precision right into the hot congee, sending a series of miniature ripples expanding across the surface. Ultimately, she forced her trembling arms to lift the heavy bowl up. Her hands were shaking with an absolute, uncontrollable ferocity, causing the ceramic spoon to repeatedly chatter violently against the rim of the bowl, emitting a sequence of sharp, fragile, clinking sounds, keeping her head deeply buried. She took tiny, hesitant sips, slowly guiding that simple bowl of plain white congee, now thoroughly infused with her salty tears, into her mouth. At first, it was nothing more than a mechanical, lifeless act of swallowing. But moments later, as if a primal, long-suppressed starvation had suddenly been reawakened within her, her pace began to aggressively quicken. Within minutes, the entire bowl was scraped completely clean. I maintained absolute silence throughout, gently retrieving her empty dish to ladle another half-serving into it. She didn't offer a single word of protest, silently accepting the refill and resuming her quiet meal. The moment she finished that second helping, she finally set the porcelain spoon aside, with some warm nourishment finally populating her stomach. A microscopic hint of life seemed to return to her complexion, shedding a fraction of that horrifying deathly pallor. I efficiently cleared away the dishes from the table, and then gestured toward the guest suite situated right next to the master bedroom. That room over there is yours. Go turn in and get some much-needed rest. The door to the guest quarters stood wide open, revealing a plush mattress dressed in fresh immaculate linens, a spacious wardrobe, and a sweeping floor-to-ceiling window showcasing the brilliant city skyline. She hovered rigidly at the threshold, staring blankly at that soft, inviting bed. Her eyes overflowed with an absolute aching yearning. Yet she remained completely paralyzed, unable to take a single step forward, as though she weren't looking at a bed at all, but rather a beautiful, forbidden illusion she was completely unworthy of experiencing. Go on in, I repeated firmly, infusing my tone with an authoritative, non-negotiable command. Only then did she snap out of her daze like someone jolted awake from a trance, keeping her chin tucked low as she hurried past the threshold, before gently, almost soundlessly clicking the door shut behind her. I retreated into my own private quarters. Yet my mind was completely wired, devoid of even a shred of sleepiness. I could distinctly hear faint muffled vibrations echoing through the shared wall, the unmistakable sound of fractured suffocating sobs being choked back with absolute agony. It felt as though a colossal invisible fist had violently clamped down on my heart, squeezing tighter and tighter with every passing second. I had successfully tracked her down. I had brought her back into my personal sanctuary. This was supposed to be the glorious climax I had fantasized about a million times, the ultimate redemption, and the perfect repayment of my emotional debt. Yet I didn't experience even a microscopic ounce of relief or triumph. There was only a heavy, unspeakable agony suffocating my soul. The very same woman who had once used $90,000 to rescue me like a benevolent deity from the suffocating quicksand of my absolute lowest point was now reduced to depending on me for a single bowl of plain porridge, just to sustain her most basic primitive survival. The sheer absurdity and cruelty of destiny were laid entirely bare in this very moment. Over the course of the subsequent few days, a profoundly eerie, unspoken understanding developed between the two of us. I maintained my brutal corporate grind, heading to the office day after day, while she remained confined inside the safety of the apartment. She slept for staggering, unnatural stretches of time. On that first day, she remained unconscious for nearly 20 hours straight, as if frantically trying to claw back years of profound sleep deprivation, all in one single exhaustive session. She still refused to utter a single syllable, leaving us trapped in a complete, absolute communication blackout. Every single morning before my commute, I would whip up a basic breakfast and leave it waiting on the counter. Before fetching a hot dinner back home after logging off from work, I purchased a brand new smartphone for her, complete with a freshly activated SIM card. and loaded her wardrobe with piles of fresh clothing. Not the glamorous high-end designer dresses from her past, but the most comfortable oversized casual hoodies, basic tees, and soft denim jeans. I carefully arranged them inside her bedroom closet. She would silently consume every bit of nourishment I left behind, and she began dressing in the apparel I supplied. Yet through it all, she behaved exactly like a ghostly, transparent phantom haunting the corners of this apartment. So quiet that her actual physical presence was almost completely imperceptible. I could profoundly sense that. She was weaponizing this heavy, unyielding silence as a shield to protect the absolute, final, fragile shred of her dignity. She desperately avoided any vocal exchange with me, because the second she opened her mouth, it would force her to confront reality, to openly acknowledge her devastating downfall, to expose her humiliating broken condition, and to admit that she was utterly dependent on my charity and pity. I knew with absolute certainty that I had to give her the space to process it all. The ice finally began to crack on the fourth day. The moment I stepped through the door after a grueling shift, I noticed that the messy pile of dirty breakfast dishes I had abandoned in the sink that morning had been scrubbed absolutely spotless, perfectly organized and stacked upon the drying rack. Even the apartment's hardwood floors had been meticulously swept and mopped, looking infinitely more pristine than when I cleaned them myself. Stepping cautiously into the living room, my eyes locked onto her figure resting on the sofa. She was no longer retreating into the dark confines of her bedroom. Instead, she was simply sitting there in absolute serenity, gazing out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the bleeding twilight skyline. Her silhouette appeared so devastatingly frail, looking paper-thin. The exact second she registered the sound of my arrival, her tense shoulders gave an almost imperceptible sharp flinch. She pushed herself up to a stand, turning around to lock her eyes on me. Her dry lips parted slightly, trembling as if she were desperately clawing for words. But ultimately, she swallowed them down, remaining completely mute. Bowing her head deeply, she turned to retreat back into the isolation of her room. "Hold on," I interjected, freezing her in her tracks. She stood completely still, her back dead to me. "You don't have to do any of this," I muttered, causing her entire posture to lock up like ice. And an agonizing silence trickled past before she finally pivoted around, forcing herself to confront my gaze directly for the absolute first time. Her eyes were a chaotic vortex of profoundly complex emotions, a volatile mix of raw gratitude, deep humiliation, psychological struggle, and a chilling, unyielding resolve that I couldn't fully comprehend. And then she finally broke her silence. This was the definitive, historic moment since crossing the threshold of this sanctuary, that she actually directed a sentence toward me. Her voice was profoundly hoarse, dry, and entirely gravelly, sounding exactly like two coarse sheets of rough sandpaper grinding together. "I can't just freeload here," she rasped out in a barely audible whisper. Yet those words hit with the impact of a steel spike, driving themselves ruthlessly deep into the core of my heart. Even after descending into this absolute living hell, she was still desperately keeping score over her independence. She was still at her very core the unyieldingly proud Su Yuanyuan. I locked my gaze onto her shivering form, an overwhelming storm of bittersweet emotions suffocating my mind. I marched directly into my private study, reached into the absolute darkest, most hidden drawer of my desk, and pulled out a specific sacred journal. It was an old, weathered notebook whose leather cover had grown thoroughly frayed and worn. Striding back out into the living room, I closed the distance between us, flipped the journal wide open, and extended it directly toward her. Utterly bewildered, she tilted her head downward, and the exact millisecond her gaze brushed against the four bold words inked onto the header of the very first page. Her pupils violently, sharply constricted with absolute shock. Those four words read, "The 4-year plan." Directly beneath that title, etched in my immaculate, sharp, and meticulous handwriting, was a comprehensive ledger, documenting every single cent of that $90,000 lifeline, tuition fees, basic cost of living, textbooks, and research materials, and the survival funds wired back to my family. Every solitary transaction was crystal clear. I pointed directly at the column logging my cost of living, locking eyes with her as I said, "Back then you used $90,000 to fund 4 entire years of my rent and survival." My voice remained perfectly level and calm, yet it carried an absolute, undeniable weight of conviction. "Now the tables have turned. It's my turn to back you up." She stared blankly at the open pages of that weathered journal, tracking the endless rows of meticulous numbers and detailed annotations. To her, these records represented a casual gamble she had long since forgotten. But to another human being, it was a debt paid with 4 solid years of youth, executed with a level of dedication that bordered on absolute reverence. A sacred contract of survival brought to life. Her fingertips began to shudder with absolute, uncontrollable intensity. Slowly, she extended her hand, longing to physically touch those familiar handwritten words on the page. Yet she pulled back completely terrified. Within those eyes which had remained entirely hollow and dead over the past few days, something fundamental finally shattered into absolute pieces. That detailed 4-year blueprint acted as the ultimate key, brutally shattering the emotional floodgates she had kept locked away for so long. She could no longer sustain that pathetic, fragile illusion of composure. Bearing her face entirely in her hands, her trembling legs gave out as she slowly collapsed into a crouch on the floor. Her shoulders heaved with violent, chaotic tremors, and the crushing agony she had suppressed for far too long finally breached her defenses, escaping like wildfire through the cracks of her fingers. This was no longer a silent stream of quiet tears, nor was it a subdued, gentle whimper. It was a soul-shattering, earth-shaking torrent of absolute hysterical weeping, as if she were violently purging every ounce of the devastating abuse, hopeless despair, and paralyzing terror she had accumulated over the years. I made no move to pull her back up to her feet, nor did I utter a single generic line of comfort, because I knew with absolute certainty that she didn't need cheap, superficial pity right now. What she desperately required was a safe zone to completely lose her mind and release the absolute worst of her inner demons. I simply stood there in absolute silence close by her side, gently placing a box of tissues within her immediate reach, like a mute, unyielding guardian angel, allowing the echoes of her raw grief to reverberate through the dead silence of the apartment for an eternity. She wept until her throat went completely hoarse and raw, her entire frame shivering uncontrollably from sheer physical exhaustion, before the storm inside her finally began to subside. Crouched on the hardwood floor like a completely abandoned child who had lost her way, her shoulders continued to hitch with sporadic heavy aftershocks. I poured a fresh glass of warm water and extended it to her. She accepted it with a trembling grip, taking a tiny hesitant sip, as the volatile storm of her emotions slowly gradually stabilized. "Stand up, the hardwood floor is freezing," I muttered softly. Clutching the armrest of the sofa, she unsteadily pushed herself up to her feet, before heavily collapsing onto the soft cushions. I gently slid that weathered journal across the glass coffee table, positioning it right in front of her, as a heavy, endless silence completely swallowed the living room. After what felt like an eternity, she finally broke the quiet, her voice completely cracked and raw. "I'm so sorry." Her words caught me off guard and I froze, locking my eyes on her face. "For everything that went down back then, I am truly sorry," she whispered, keeping her head deeply buried, her shaky voice completely overflowing with devastating guilt. "I had absolutely no idea. I never realized just what that money truly meant to your entire life. You have zero reasons to apologize," I interjected, instantly cutting her off. "In fact, I'm the one who owes you a lifetime of gratitude, without that crucial lifeline. The version of me standing before you today wouldn't even exist. I meant every single word of it. It was the absolute truth. That $90,000 was never just a random sum of cash. It was a piercing beam of pure blinding light, piercing through the absolute darkest chapter of my life. It was the solitary ultimate saving grace I desperately managed to grasp, while suffocating and drowning in that hopeless abyss. It completely reforged my broken identity, and it laid the foundation for every single bit of my success." She slowly lifted her gaze, her heavily bloodshot, tear-rimmed eyes locking directly onto mine. Her lips trembled violently for a fraction of a second, before she finally forced out the one burning question that was haunting her soul. "But why?" Her voice was incredibly faint, a mere breath of air, sounding as if she were interrogating me, yet simultaneously screaming the question inward at her own soul. "Why on earth would you ever go to such extreme lengths just to be this good to me?" I stared right back into her eyes, looking closely at her, taking in those fractured orbs that were completely consumed by overwhelming confusion and disbelief. Instead of offering a direct vocal explanation, I quietly slipped my hand into my pocket to retrieve my smartphone. I bypassed the lock screen, launched my secure banking application, navigated directly to a very specific locked-away account ledger, and gently handed the device over to her. Utterly bewildered, she reached out and accepted the phone. But the exact millisecond her eyes registered the staggering figure flashing on the screen, her entire physical body completely locked up like ice. The current account balance read an astronomical 12 million yuan. In that breathless moment, she whipped her head up, staring at me with absolute wild disbelief. "Is this your money?" "That is the original principal of 90,000, I countered smoothly, "combined with the compounding returns accumulated over the last 8 solid years. Calculated strictly using the absolute highest premium investment rates available. I had this entirely mapped out long ago, but I was completely unable to track you down until now." Su Yuan remained absolutely glued to the smartphone screen, staring blindly at that long string of digits. This 12 million, when stacked against the catastrophic mountain-high debt that had completely crushed her family, amounted to nothing more than a tiny drop in a vast ocean. Yet she understood with absolute certainty that the profound significance of this massive sum had long since transcended its literal monetary wealth. This account had been my singular consuming obsession over the past 8 grueling years, the ultimate unyielding lighthouse that refused to let its flame die, while I navigated through the pitch-black abyss of life completely alone. It represented the absolute peak of everything I had bled and fought for just to reclaim, the fundamental dignity of a man. More importantly, it was the definitive proof I needed to show her that the dynamic between us was never just a toxic cycle of a high and mighty benefactor and a pathetic charity case, but rather a beautifully balanced equal partnership. The realization finally hit her like a lightning bolt. She finally understood the exact reason why I had hunted her down, why I had escorted her back into my private domain, and exactly why I was going to such extreme lengths to shelter and protect her right now. This wasn't a display of superficial empathy. It wasn't some pathetic, condescending pity. And it sure as hell wasn't some arrogant, top-down act of charity. This was the ultimate settling of scores. A grand official closing ceremony that had been delayed for 4 long years. She gently handed the smartphone back into my grasp, before burying her face entirely back into her palms. This time around, however, she didn't shed a single tear. Instead, her entire frame merely shuddered with a deep, rhythmic vibration. As I watched her sit there, a gaping hollow void that had been carved deep into my chest for an eternity seemed to be completely, entirely filled to the brim in this very second. I stepped across the room and slid onto the cushions right beside her, completely abandoning the rigid emotional distance I had maintained earlier. Slowly extending my arm, I gently, reassuringly rested my hand over her shivering shoulder. Su Yuan Yuan, I murmured, addressing her by her full name. Allowing my tone to soften to an unprecedented level of tenderness. It's all over now. She lowered her hand, lifting her heavily tear-stained face to lock her gaze directly onto mine. Beneath the warm ambient glow of the living room lights, the utter emptiness and dead numbness that had possessed her eyes completely vanished, replaced by a brilliant microscopic flicker of starlight dancing within her pupils, igniting spark by spark a long-lost spark of hope for a brand new future. She kept her eyes locked onto mine for what felt like an eternity, and then the absolute corners of her lips slowly, subtly pulled upward into a faint, beautifully fragile smile. It was a smile so profoundly fragile, yet so incredibly precious, resembling the absolute first sprout of life clawing its way out of the frozen tundra after a relentlessly brutal, agonizingly long winter. I knew right then and there that between her and me, that grand transaction forged in money and pride, had finally reached its definitive conclusion in this exact second, while a brand new chapter was only just beginning. The next morning, when I finally drifted awake, the morning sun was already blazing. This marked the absolute first time since moving into this luxury high-rise that I had slept in naturally without an alarm. Stepping out of my master bedroom, I was caught completely off guard to find Su Yuan Yuan already up and active. She wasn't curled up into a ball on the couch like the previous few days. Instead, she stood tall right in front of that massive floor-to-ceiling window. The early morning rays pierced through the glass, perfectly tracing her silhouette with a mesmerizing hazy golden aura. Dressed comfortably in my oversized baggy streetwear, she cradled a warm mug of water between both hands, silently observing the bustling city beneath her as it slowly woke up. Registering the sound of my footsteps approaching, she calmly turned her head, and a solid night of peaceful rest seemed to have restored a fraction of her vital energy. Her eyes were no longer a hollow dead void. They looked more like a deep, tranquil pool of water that had been stagnant for ages, though the bottom remained entirely obscured. At the very least, the surface was no longer radiating an aura of absolute death. "Morning," she whispered softly. This was the historic first time she had initiated a greeting with me. "Morning," I nodded back, striding directly into the kitchen area to retrieve fresh milk and eggs from the refrigerator. She quietly trailed right behind me, lingering at the threshold of the kitchen, looking somewhat hesitant and anxious. "Would it be all right if I used your computer?" "Go ahead. The password is your birthday," I answered smoothly without even turning around to face her. I could profoundly feel her entire posture lock up in absolute shock. Yet I refused to look back, focusing entirely on whisking the eggs in my bowl. That specific system password was something I had casually set the very day I moved into this place. Even I couldn't explain why I instinctively chose her birth date back then. Perhaps deep within the recesses of my subconscious, this entire apartment was inherently tied to that grueling 8-year-long transaction of ours. By the time I carried the freshly pan-seared eggs and steaming glasses of hot milk over to the dining table, she was sitting intensely in front of the computer screen scanning through some data. I chose not to disrupt her focus, and we quietly proceeded to eat our breakfast in complete silence. This marked the absolute first time we sat down together like normal roommates, sharing a single dining table and a casual home-cooked meal. The atmosphere had completely shed the suffocating tension and awkwardness of the past few days, transitioning instead into a subtle, delicate state of calm. These past few years, she suddenly initiated the conversation, her eyes still firmly locked onto the glowing monitor. "You've been doing exceptionally well for yourself, right?" "It's been decent," I replied smoothly. "The workload is completely brutal and exhausting, but the financial payoff makes it entirely worth it. I noticed that your graduation thesis ranked #1 in the entire department," she murmured. I was genuinely caught off guard that she would actually track those academic milestones. "The same goes for you," I countered. "I distinctly recall hearing that you secured a prestigious admission offer, straight from the University of Pennsylvania." The exact second that elite accomplishment was brought up, the spark in her eyes instantly completely lost its luster. Looking exactly like a fading star losing its light in an instant, she gave a barely audible murmur of acknowledgement, instantly shutting down the dialogue, before aggressively chugging down the rest of her milk. I knew right away that I had accidentally struck a raw, agonizing nerve. "I'll handle the cleanup piece," she muttered, pushing herself up to gather the dirty dishes. "No need," I said, gently pressing my hand over hers. "Just leave everything right there." My fingertips accidentally brushed against her bare skin during the movement. Her hand felt incredibly icy, and she was so terribly emaciated that I could literally feel the sharp contours of her bones. It was as if she had received a violent electric shock, causing her to instantly yank her hand back in a panic. "Li Xuan," she began, lifting her chin, to lock a remarkably intense, dead serious gaze onto mine. "I absolutely refuse to stay here indefinitely as a useless freeloader. I need to go out and secure a job immediately. Your physical health is nowhere near fully recovered yet." "I am perfectly fine now," she asserted, her tone ringing with absolute unyielding determination. "I've been looking around, and there are plenty of entry-level openings that don't require an elite degree or specialized professional training. For instance, working as a restaurant server or a supermarket cashier, I can easily handle those roles." I just stared at her in dead silence, taking in every detail of that face, which was completely consumed by pure unadulterated stubbornness. I knew with absolute certainty that forcing the proud Su Yuan Yuan to work as a lowly waitress was a fate far more agonizing to her soul than death itself. Yet she was entirely willing to subject herself to that humiliation, rather than depend on my charity for another single second. I let a heavy silence linger between us for a fleeting moment. "All right, fair enough," I conceded, "but before you rush into anything, your absolute priority is securing a brand new government ID, along with an updated bank account." I slid that specific debit card preloaded with the 12 million yuan directly across the smooth surface, placing it right under her nose. "The security pin code is exactly the same as before your birthday." She glared intensely at the plastic card, her lips pressed together into a rigid, defiant line, making absolutely no move to claim it. "Listen, this isn't a handout," I asserted, capturing her gaze with absolute authority, delivering each word with laser-like precision. "This is what you rightfully earned. It is the legitimate ROI on the initial seed capital you invested in me. You will use this war chest to fundamentally reboot your entire life. Consider this the absolute final clause of our binding agreement." The technical term agreement served as the ultimate unspoken safety net shared between our souls. It provided her with a valid, dignified excuse to accept my support without feeling shame, while simultaneously gifting me a perfectly clean conscience to protect and nurture her without overstepping any boundaries. She finally extended her arm and clutched the plastic card, though her delicate fingertips still shuddered with a microscopic tremor. Once the weekend rolled around, I escorted her to the local precinct to expedite her replacement ID. The exact second she stepped into the photo booth, a wave of intense anxiety completely washed over her. Likely because she hadn't faced the camera lens in such a chaotic eternity, she seemed to have entirely forgotten how to arrange her features into a standard human expression. "Miss, I'm going to need you to crack a slight smile for me. Just act natural." The photographer barked, his voice laced with clear irritation. She forced herself to tug at the corners of her mouth, but the result was an agonizing grimace that looked infinitely more painful than crying. I instantly intervened, offering a quick apology to the technician, before kneeling down directly in front of her booth. "Look right at me," I commanded softly. She lifted her eyelids, staring back with a completely vacant, bewildered expression. "Do you still recall our freshman sports festival back in the day?" I abruptly questioned. She froze in absolute surprise. "You were seated elegantly at the main VIP stadium pavilion, rocking your official student council blazer, and sporting a pristine white sun hat," I added, painting a vivid picture of the memory I had kept locked in my mind for years. "The sun was incredibly blinding that afternoon, and you were completely lost in a lively conversation with the peer beside you, laughing so brilliantly and carefree." My delivery remained incredibly smooth and soothing, sounding as if I were merely narrating a distant fairy tale that had zero connection to her present reality. Yet the light within her eyes underwent a dramatic transformation. The hollow confusion instantly evaporated, replaced by a shimmering emotional veil of tears. "Just recreate that exact smile for me one more time, all right?" I requested in a soothing whisper. She kept her eyes locked on mine for an eternity, before gently closing her eyelids and taking a massive, stabilizing breath of fresh air. The moment her eyes fluttered open again, she aligned her focus directly with the camera lens and gradually allowed a soft, genuine smile to grace her features. With a sharp mechanical click, the camera captured the perfect shot, freezing that exact split second in time. Once the identification process was fully sorted out, we immediately made our way over to the local bank branch. However, the entire procedure turned out to be infinitely more complex than I had anticipated. The absolute second the banking clerk manually logged her legal name into the secure network database, the computer monitor instantly flashed. a vibrant blood-red warning notification across the screen. It flagged her status as an official high-risk blacklisted debtor. The teller's professional expression shifted drastically in an instant, and her gaze toward us became laced with an undeniable layer of suspicion and cold contempt. "I'm deeply sorry." "Ma'am," her tone instantly hardened into a robotic, strictly corporate vibe. "But per federal regulatory guidelines, we are legally barred from authorizing any new debit card accounts for you. Furthermore, every single financial asset currently under your name has already been completely frozen by court order." Su Yuanyuan's face instantly drained of all color, turning deathly pale. She stood frozen on the spot, looking exactly like a convicted criminal receiving a public sentencing, forced to endure the passing judgment and whispers of the surrounding crowd. I could literally feel her entire body vibrating with intense tremors. Stepping forward aggressively, I positioned myself to completely shield her behind my back, effectively cutting off those hostile prying eyes from her view. "Thank you for your time. We understand completely," I stated firmly, taking her by the hand and guiding her straight out of the building. The sunlight outside was absolutely blinding and intense, yet it failed to provide her with even a microscopic ounce of warmth. "It's a completely lost cause, Li Xuan," she whispered, leaning heavily against the exterior wall, her voice echoing with a profound, limitless sense of despair. "I am literally a state-certified deadbeat in the eyes of the law. I don't even possess the basic human right to own a simple debit card. Securing a job is completely out of the question for me. Absolutely no legitimate corporation would ever onboard an employee who can't even open a standard payroll account to get paid. This entire society has officially wiped its hands clean of me. There is no place left for me to exist." Wrapping her arms tightly around her knees, she slowly collapsed into a crouch on the pavement, burying her face deeply into the crook of her elbows. The fragile shred of hope we had meticulously rebuilt over the past few days was violently pulverized into dust when forced to clash against the brutal reality of her situation. Staring down at her utterly defeated silhouette in excruciating pain, stabbed straight through my chest like a million jagged needles. But I understood with absolute certainty that at this exact second, any cliche words of comfort would sound completely hollow. I whipped out my smartphone, instantly dialing the number of a trusted senior colleague from my university days, who had climbed the ranks to become a high-profile partner at a top-tier law firm. "Hey senior, it's Li Xuan. I urgently need to pick your brain regarding a major legal situation. Specifically about someone flagged as a blacklisted high-risk debtor. If we want to completely scrub their name from that government blacklist, what exact legal protocols do we need to trigger?" Quote, dot. I intentionally raised my voice, speaking with booming clarity, for the sole purpose of ensuring that Su Yuan, who was still curled up helplessly on the pavement, could hear every syllable. Her shoulders instantly stopped shaking. Slowly, she lifted her head, staring up at me with absolute utter disbelief. I deliberately kept my eyes off her, focusing all my energy on the detailed breakdown coming through the speaker, nodding dynamically while throwing out strategic follow-up questions. "Understood. The primary debt liability stems from joint and several guarantees tied to a corporate bankruptcy. Correct, the individual has absolutely zero history of hiding or laundering assets. Got it, that makes perfect sense. So theoretically speaking, as long as we can negotiate a formal settlement with the primary creditors and execute a structural chunk of the repayment obligations, we can officially petition the court to revoke the blacklisting. Am I tracking this right? Perfect. I deeply appreciate the insight, senior. Let me buy you a premium dinner sometime soon." I terminated the call, dropping down into a crouch right before her to meet her gaze perfectly. "You heard the expert. This catastrophic scenario isn't nearly as hopeless as you think. This is far from a dead end. It's just a highly tedious, complex legal hurdle we need to clear. I'm going to retain the absolute best legal team in the country for you. We will track down every single creditor on that list, force them to the negotiating table, and engineer a solid, realistic repayment structure. Every single cent of that debt, we are going to obliterate it together." Locking my eyes directly onto hers, I delivered my words with a commanding absolute certainty that brooked zero argument. "You are no longer fighting this war alone." Her tears immediately erupted once more like a broken dam. But this time, that heavy downpour was no longer fueled by pure despair. Retaining powerhouse attorneys auditing the massive debt portfolio and tracking down hostile creditors, a brutal, mind-bogglingly intricate maze of legal warfare was officially set into motion. I aggressively leveraged every ounce of influence I had built over the years. Every single drop of connection and resource I had painstakingly built up over the years. My senior colleague from law school acting as my chief legal counsel. Highly recommended an elite legal task force that specializes exclusively in high-stakes debt restructuring. And corporate financial disputes, a squad renowned for being absolutely lethal and efficient. Su Yuan systematically unburdened her mind and laid out every toxic detail she knew, directly onto the lead attorney's desk. The catastrophic, messy financial ruins left behind by her father's bankrupt corporation proved to be exponentially more convoluted and deeply corrupted than I had ever anticipated. It was a massive web involving numerous predatory banking cartels, alongside dozens of ruthless cutthroat private shadow creditors. The grand total of the outstanding liability was a completely mind-numbing astronomical figure, however precisely as our legal mastermind confidently stated. As long as the key players are still drawing breath, and as long as there is an absolute unwavering resolve to settle the score, there will always be a backdoor out of hell. Without wasting a single microsecond, they initiated contact to test the waters with the absolute largest institutional creditor banks, scrambling to negotiate the viable possibility of a massive debt restructuring settlement. This was bound to be an agonizingly long drawn-out chess match, an impossible feat to accomplish in a single overnight miracle. Yet at the bare minimum, we had officially executed our first chess move, knowing that a top-tier group of sharks was actively handling the cleanup of this financial toxic waste. The colossal, suffocating boulder anchored to Su Yuanyuan's soul seemed to have finally been pried loose, granting her a sliver of breathing room. Her overall psychological state began to skyrocket with a visible night and day transformation. She completely stopped locking herself inside the darkness of her bedroom like a hopeless hermit. Now, the moment I returned home from my corporate shift, I would occasionally catch her casually lounging on the living room sofa, utilizing her tablet PC to absorb various advanced open-source university lectures, advanced economic governance, and cutting-edge design. Both happened to be the high-level domains she once utterly dominated. She resembled a hyper-arid sponge that had been dehydrated for far too long, now aggressively, greedily devouring every single drop of knowledge that came her way, desperately trying to claw back the precious years she had wastefully thrown away. Late one evening, while I was deeply buried in corporate work inside my personal study, she quietly glided into the room holding a mug of steaming hot milk. Still grinding away at this hour, she gently placed the warm beverage right beside my hand. "Yeah, a major project has officially reached its critical make-or-break phase," I responded mechanically, my fingers furiously hammering the keyboard without my eyes even flickering upward. Yet she didn't immediately retreat. Instead, she anchored herself directly in front of my massive wooden bookshelf, meticulously analyzing the sterile corporate decor lined up on the shelves. "Your personal workspace is way too hollow and clinical," she remarked out of absolute nowhere. I abruptly froze my typing hands and lifted my head to look at her. "Aside from these dense, exhausting professional legal journals, it's literally nothing but incredibly bleak, boring corporate ornaments." She extended a manicured finger pointing directly toward a specific piece displayed on my shelf. "An old brass desktop globe, and honestly, this thing right here is ridiculously old-fashioned." Her voice carried a demanding absolute authority that brooked zero argument, a tone uniquely belonging to the high and mighty Princess Su Yuanyuan. I felt a genuine urge to chuckle. "Is that so?" I murmured, leaning back into my leather chair, while observing her with sheer highly amused curiosity. "Then by your expert opinion, how exactly should this space be styled? At the very least, it requires a subtle touch of artistic sophistication," she asserted, stepping closer and pointing directly at the vast empty wall positioned right behind me. "A premium canvas painting absolutely needs to be mounted right here. Something sporting cool muted tones. Perhaps an avant-garde abstract piece. It would perfectly neutralize the aggressive, rigid straight lines dominating your room, making the entire atmosphere feel infinitely softer and more inviting." She detailed her vision while dynamically gesturing in the air with her hands, deep within her pupils. There was a brilliant flicker of pure unadulterated confidence and intense focus, a radiant spark that only ever manifested whenever she was actively discussing a creative domain she passionately adored. In this exact split second, she was no longer the broken, defeated victim desperate for a savior. She had seamlessly transformed back into that dazzling, high-profile woman who possessed an uncompromising, ultimate obsession with aesthetic perfection. "Sounds like you're a certified expert," I noted. "Naturally," she shot back, lifting her chin high, as a subtle, proud smirk gracefully danced across the corners of her lips. "I actually minored in art history during my university days, and my father used to curate an extensive private collection of high-end masterpieces." The moment her father was brought up, her vibrant smile dimmed a fraction. Yet the fiery determination burning in her eyes refused to go out. "In that case, I'm officially putting you in charge of the project," I stated. "Wait, what?" She froze, completely caught off guard. "I'm formally authorizing you to act as my chief interior design and art consultant," I declared with deadpan absolute seriousness. "So help me completely overhaul and redesign this entire apartment. You have total control over the budget." She stared at me in stunned silence, her brain seemingly failing to process the sudden curveball. I grabbed the sleek pen resting on my desk, scribbled a quick line of text onto a sticky note, and slid it directly across the surface right into her hands. "Consider this your official first retainer payment." The ink on the note clearly read, "Consulting fee 1 bowl of shrimp rice." She stared blankly at the words for a brief moment, before a sudden core memory seemingly flashed through her mind, causing her to burst into a beautiful, completely unrestrained laugh. That marked the very first moment since her arrival at this luxury apartment that she actually let out a genuine audible laugh. It was incredibly crisp, beautiful, and vibrant, resembling the pure melodic chime of wind bells swaying in the breeze. A single bowl is nowhere near enough, she declared, lifting her head high, with her eyes beautifully crinkling into crescent shapes as she locked onto mine. Her voice laced with a subtle, playfully mischievous, teasing tone. Given my premium aesthetic expertise, I'm worth at least a whole semester's worth of shrimp rice. Deal. It's a done deal, I replied with a bright smile. Outside the window, the sprawling city lights blazed brilliantly like a glittering galaxy, solidifying my realization that the genuine elite Su Yuan Yuan had finally made her grand return. And with that, the dramatic saga unfolding between the two of us had officially flipped to a brand new, magnificent chapter, one no longer chained to the suffocating notions of crushing debt and transactional repayment, but entirely focused on profound companionship and a beautiful rebirth. Su Yuan Yuan approached this new gig as my chief interior design consultant, with the intense seriousness of an official binding corporate contract. By the very next morning, she had fully locked into professional grind mode. While I was away at my corporate job, she completely paused her basic online learning courses and went straight ahead to completely hijack the high-spec beast of a PC. Resting inside my private study room, she aggressively scanned through high-end furniture design platforms, elite artists' personal portfolios, and exclusive online galleries, acting exactly like a seasoned professional museum curator. She even went out of her way to download complex professional blueprinting software, skillfully manipulating the mouse and keyboard, to meticulously construct pixel by pixel a flawless high-fidelity 3D rendering of my luxury apartment. This was undeniably a completely uncharted technical territory for her. Yet her learning curve was incredibly rapid and brilliant. Her flawless aesthetic taste was entirely hardwired into her DNA, a natural instinct refined through years of being deeply immersed in supreme luxury since her early childhood days. She possessed an absolute innate understanding of true beauty, paired with a masterclass knowledge of how to seamlessly blend contrasting design elements into a unified palette, generating a profoundly harmonious and breathtaking aesthetic vibe. The second I stepped through the door after my evening commute, she would aggressively march over with her tablet in hand, resembling a dedicated corporate executive delivering a high-stakes pitch to their CEO, as she presented her latest design breakthroughs with deadpan seriousness. The current palette on this main living room wall is entirely too icy and sterile. I highly recommend overhauling it with a rich, warm charcoal gray tint, or applying premium, high-texture wall fabric instead. This specific upgrade will instantly elevate the room's dimensional depth. Furthermore, your current couch features a hyperlinear boxy structure. It's far too rigid and needs to be softened with some elegant curve accents. We can immediately ditch that aggressively boxy coffee table and swap it for a sleek circular one or an organic asymmetrical statement piece. And don't even get me started on the illumination setup. Relying solely on a single overhead ceiling fixture is incredibly sterile. We absolutely need to introduce a premium floor lamp in that vacant corner, perch an elegant accent lamp right beside the couch, and lean heavily into layered ambient lighting to cultivate a cozy vibe. She rattled on without a single pause, her eyes blazing with an intensely professional and fiercely confident aura. I barely offered a word of interruption, choosing instead to listen in total captivated silence, as my gaze remained locked onto her. It felt as though I were staring straight back through a time machine 2 years ago, back to that chaotic, hyper-competitive university seminar classroom, where she would effortlessly dominate the room, tearing through the massive group projects we had pulled grueling all-nighters to pull together, delivering lethal razor-sharp critiques with surgical precision, the legendary Su Yuan Yuan. Back then, I felt absolutely nothing toward her but sheer intimidation and distant alienation. Yet right now, watching her glow in her element, I found her completely breathtaking. Your analysis is absolute perfection, I concluded smoothly the exact second she finally finished her passionate design pitch. So when exactly are we hitting the shops to source everything? She blinked in sheer disbelief, clearly completely blindsided by how effortlessly and instantly I had approved her entire creative blueprint. But what about the financial budget, Tiet? She inquired, navigating the topic with extreme caution. You call the shots, I replied simply. You're the elite consultant here after all. She gently bit her lower lip, gazing down at her tablet screen while aggressively scrolling through her spreadsheets for a moment, before turning the display to showcase a specific grand total. The actual figure she presented wasn't even substantial enough to cover the retail cost of the premium designer blazer I was currently wearing. This is entirely too low, I noted with a slight frown. It's more than enough, she immediately countered, her voice ringing with absolute unshakable conviction. We don't need to waste capital on overpriced luxury brands. True aesthetic genius does not equate to a bloated price tag. I happen to know about a curated weekend creative market downtown, where a ton of brilliant independent designers and underground artists showcase and liquidate their custom masterpieces. We can go scout the venue together. I guarantee we'll unearth some incredibly unique high-value gems. Her eyes were sparkling like polished diamonds, radiating a profound sense of pure, eager anticipation. That marked the absolute first time I had ever witnessed her face light up with the raw, chaotic excitement, typically reserved for budget hunting and thrifting, a staggering, mind-blowing contrast to the untouchable heiress she used to be. Yet at the exact same time, it felt remarkably and beautifully harmonious. When Saturday arrived, I took the wheel and drove her straight out, to that trendy creative market nestled in the distant outskirts of the metropolis. The entire market was set up inside a massive repurposed abandoned factory, giving off an incredible raw industrial aesthetic mixed with vibrant artistic energy. The venue was absolutely packed to the brim with young, expressive faces, flanking an endless maze of bizarre, eccentric pop-up stalls. Su Yuan reacted like a fish instantly returning to its home waters. She grabbed me by the wrist, weaving dynamically through the dense crowd of vendors. The moment her eyes locked onto any unique item, she would unleash an incredibly sophisticated, highly insightful breakdown of its value. Look at this specific candle holder. It's meticulously cast from raw industrial concrete. The structural silhouette is incredibly avant-garde, and it's an absolute steal at only 30 bucks. And this tapestry over here is completely hand-woven. The color blocking is insanely bold and fearless. Mounting this on the main wall would easily elevate the whole space. Oh my god, and look at this masterpiece. She abruptly halted her steps right in front of a stall specializing in edgy, abstract oil paintings, her eyes instantly lighting up like high-voltage neon signs. This specific artist's palette heavily mirrors Matisse's legendary style, yet the brushwork is infinitely more fluid and unrestricted. Excuse me, how much for this piece? The vendor, a young and passionate fine arts student, quoted an incredibly fair, down-to-earth price tag. Su Yuan swiveled her head back to look at me, her eyes flashing with a mix of silent permission-seeking and overwhelming intense desire. I gave her an immediate approving nod, instantly clearing the digital payment on the spot. I then carefully rolled up the modest-sized canvas with absolute precision. For the remainder of the entire afternoon, we relentlessly scoured every single corner of that creative bazaar. She sourced an extensive collection of custom goods statement vases, industrial candle holders, textured tapestries, bizarre geometric sculptures, and of course that prized abstract painting. Individually, not a single item carried a premium price tag, but the moment you envisioned them styled together, her elite, high-end aesthetic taste became undeniable. I trailed closely behind her, taking full responsibility for heavy lifting and processing payments, acting as the absolute perfect dedicated assistant. Golden sunlight streamed through the massive dirty windows of the old factory, casting a breathtaking cinematic pattern of dancing light and shadow across her silhouette. Clutching that painting tightly against her chest, she was actively locked in a fierce debate with a local vendor over a petty $10 discount, laughing so heartily that her eyes crinkled into beautiful crescents. Staring intently at the elegant profile of her face, an overwhelming realization suddenly hit me out of nowhere. I genuinely believed that every single drop of blood, sweat, and tears I had poured into my relentless hustle over the last 8 years was perfectly engineered solely for this exact magnificent moment, just so I could give her the strength to stand tall after surviving the absolute worst of destiny's catastrophic storms, and empower her to once again, just like right now, bask in the pure, unadulterated joys of life, and radiate a genuine, soul-stirring laugh from the absolute bottom of her heart. On the cruise back to the apartment, she completely melted into the shotgun seat, clutching her mountain of bargain treasures tightly, looking as utterly smug and satisfied as a pampered cat that had just stolen the ultimate prize. "Hey, Li Xuan," she murmured softly out of nowhere. "Thank you." "For what exactly?" I asked. "For genuinely validating my taste and giving my creative vision a real shot, idiot," she whispered. I simply flashed a warm, knowing smile and kept my focus on the road. The absolute second we crossed the threshold of the apartment, she was utterly bursting with raw adrenaline, instantly launching her extreme makeover project. Perching herself precariously on top of a wooden stool, she precisely mounted that newly acquired abstract piece directly onto the focal wall of my private study. The cool avant-garde tones of the canvas instantly shattered and neutralized the stiff, sterile atmosphere dominating the room. Next, she took that raw industrial $30 concrete candle holder we had sourced, carefully positioning it as a sleek statement piece on my master nightstand. She then elegantly draped the heavily textured hand-woven tapestry straight across the cold, barren surface of the hardwood floor. Piece by piece, every single square inch of this living space was officially being branded with her signature high-end aesthetic touch. Later that night, I quietly stepped into my study, gazing silently at the mesmerizing artwork now claiming the wall, standing frozen in total reverent awe for what felt like an eternity. This sterile concrete sanctuary where I had existed in total isolation for so long, on this monumental day, finally cracked open to radiate the comforting, unmistakable warmth of a real home. Meanwhile, the complex machinery of our elite legal team was grinding forward at a pace far exceeding our initial conservative projections. Following several rounds of brutal high-stakes negotiations, they successfully forced the absolute largest financial stakeholder on the list, a massive, highly bureaucratic state-owned bank, to finally sign off on a preliminary debt restructuring framework. The banking executives formally agreed that as long as Su Yuan could successfully liquidate a flat 20% of the core principal debt within a strictly enforced deadline, their legal counsel would officially petition the High Court to temporarily purge her identity from the state's high-risk debtor blacklist, fully restoring her fundamental civil liberties on the spot, including basic necessities like opening active bank accounts and utilizing high-speed public transit. This was without a shadow of a doubt a monumental game-changing breakthrough. However, that 20% threshold still demanded a colossal sum of liquid cash, an absolute astronomical nightmare capable of utterly crushing the spirit of any ordinary civilian. The lead attorney placed a massive, suffocatingly thick stack of legal documents directly onto the sleek coffee table sitting between us. Adjusting his expression into a dead serious look, the lead attorney spoke up. "Mr. Lee, Miss Su, this is absolute maximum leverage we can currently squeeze out of this situation. The bank has granted us a strict 3-month window to secure this liquidity. If we miss this critical deadline, every single piece of leverage we've built so far will instantly evaporate into thin air." Su Yuan stared blankly at the massive settlement agreement, the vibrant color instantly draining from her face yet again. That tiny fragile spark of hope she had just managed to ignite was immediately crushed, left teetering on the edge of collapse by this brutal reality check. The very moment we escorted the legal team out, the luxury apartment plunged straight back into a suffocating, deathly silence. She finally broke the quiet, her voice raw and completely parched. "I'll liquidate everything, the modern paintings, my entire curated collection. My father hidden away a few premium assets overseas back in the day. If I can just track them down, it's nowhere near enough." I cut her off instantly, my tone perfectly calm, yet completely unyielding. "Even if you liquidate every single item, it will merely be a drop in a bucket compared to this ocean of debt." Her shoulders instantly slumped forward, defeated, and that newfound emotional strength she had painstakingly clawed back was aggressively drained from her body in a single split second. Refusing to let her drown in this wave of pure despair, I marched straight into my study, grabbed my high-end workstation laptop, booted it up, and slid the display directly in front of her eyes. The screen illuminated a complex professional stock trading dashboard, flanked by a meticulously detailed high-net-worth personal asset ledger, blue-chip stocks, premium index funds, high-yield wealth management portfolios, and dynamic angel round equity investments in several hyper-growth startups. Over the last 8 years, aside from pushing my absolute limits at my day job, I had funneled every single second of my spare time, relentlessly dominating the aggressive waves of the capital markets. Just like the hyper-focused college kid who strategically mapped out those original $90,000. I had paranoiacally and with surgical precision engineered the compound growth of every single cent I brought home. I had long ceased to be just a basic code-writing software engineer. The sheer volume of liquid wealth I had quietly accumulated over the years was vastly superior to anything she could have ever envisioned. Su Yuan stared intensely at the glowing screen tracking the endless rows of dizzying numbers and high-tier investment projects, completely paralyzed by sheer unadulterated shock. All of this, it is more than enough to fully liquidate the initial settlement chunk, leaving us with a highly comfortable financial cushion. I stated, calmly shutting the laptop lid while locking my eyes directly onto her pupils. "I established this absolute boundary from the very beginning. This massive debt of yours, we are going to obliterate it side by side. That was never a hollow, superficial promise. But this is your hard-earned wealth. Li Xuan." She jolted up, her entire body trembling with intense emotion. "There is absolutely no way I can take your hard-earned fortune. I've already completely pulverized my own life into rock bottom, and I refuse to drag you down into this horrific abyss with me. This isn't you dragging me down, Su Yuan." I stood up, closing the distance between us until our eyes locked at dead level. "Look at this logically, it's a high-stakes business transaction. Have you forgotten I'm strategically financing your venture? I liquidate your paralyzing legal debt and pull you out of this crisis. And in return, the exact split second your enterprise stabilizes and roars back onto the absolute fast track, I legally command a dominant 51% majority stake in your company. That is peak corporate fairness, wouldn't you say?" She stood completely frozen, totally paralyzed by the proposition, gazing intently into my stone-faced, ruthlessly serious expression. A sudden profound realization hit her like a lightning bolt. She saw right through me. I was using this cold corporate facade yet again, solely to shield the fragile remaining fragments of her shattered pride. That was always my ultimate move, wrapping a diamond-hard armor of calculated business logic around a core of pure, fiercely protective warmth and devotion. But I possess absolutely nothing right now." Her voice fractured, vibrating with raw, unfiltered emotion. "I don't own a company. I have literally 0 assets left to my name. Nothing at all." "You will have it all," I countered, locking my gaze onto hers, with an absolute, unshakable conviction in my tone, as if I were simply reciting a concrete, inevitable, absolute fact of history. "We are going to legally incorporate a brand new enterprise from scratch. We can title it Yuan Yuan Designs, or literally whatever moniker your heart desires. You will stand as the ultimate founder and the exclusive creative visionary, while I act as your primary heavyweight angel investor. Tears instantly broke through her defenses, cascading down her cheeks without a single warning. Yet this time, not a single sob escaped her lips. She merely kept her eyes anchored onto mine for what felt like an eternity, before offering a fierce, emotionally charged nod of agreement. Deal. That single heavy word carried the monumental weight of 1,000 mountains. From that exact historic turning point, the fundamental energy vibrating within the luxury apartment underwent a profound evolution. We were no longer just a landlord and his upscale interior consultant. We had officially evolved into a high-powered duo of co-founders launching a commercial empire. She completely abandoned her dark phase of mourning past failures, and instead channeled 100% of her elite brainpower into constructing a hyper-aggressive corporate master blueprint for our new venture. She analyzed complex market trends, dissected rival competitors, and even took this massive initiative to start aggressively networking with high-profile contacts from her former elite art circles. That aura of a ruthless top-tier corporate powerhouse, defined by razor-sharp executive decision-making, was visibly resurrecting within her piece by glorious piece. Meanwhile, I fully spearheaded the absolute most agonizing, complex financial knots and high-stakes legal battles. I aggressively liquidated the vast majority of my stock portfolio, pulling every single cent of that massive reserve together, fully prepared to inject this lethal capital straight into our shared empire. Our daily lives began to naturally fall into a beautiful, surreal rhythm of total synchronization. Late one evening, after pulling a grueling shift at the office, I finally made it back home. Pushing the heavy front door open, I wasn't greeted by a cold, pitch-black void, but by a wave of profoundly comforting, warm illumination, and the rich, intoxicating aroma of a freshly cooked feast. I stood completely frozen on the spot. There stood Su Yuan Yuan tightly rocking. A cute, completely random cartoon of prawn that I had no clue she even unearthed, stepping out from the kitchen with a hot plate. It was a classic plate of stir-fried tomatoes and scrambled eggs, the ultimate quintessential comfort food. I noticed you've been completely running yourself ragged and skipping real meals lately. She noted, carefully placing the steaming dish onto the dining table before somewhat bashfully untying the straps of her apron. I just whipped this up on a whim, so I hope it actually hits the spot for you. Laid out across the table was a perfect 2-course meal paired with a rich broth. Aside from the signature stir-fried tomatoes and eggs, there was a vibrant plate of lightly sautéed broccoli, complemented by a hearty bowl of slow-simmered pork rib soup. My gaze lingered heavily over those home-cooked plates, before shifting entirely to lock eyes with her. And a barricaded corner of my heart instantly melted into absolute pure mush. I quietly took my seat, hoisted my chopsticks, and took a generous bite of the stir-fried tomatoes and eggs. The flavor profile was an absolute masterpiece. This is insanely delicious. I complimented genuinely. Hearing this, a wave of visible relief washed over her entire being, and a beautiful subtle smile painted her lips. Back when I was studying abroad in a foreign country, I was forced to teach myself how to survive in the kitchen, child, she murmured, gently sliding into the seat directly opposite me, whispering softly. During those days, the homesickness was completely paralyzing. This marked the absolute first time she had ever willingly unlocked the vault to her private life overseas. I continued to savor the meal, choosing to listen in total comforting silence. She unfolded a beautiful tapestry of fragmented memories, recounting how she navigated a completely alien country, the pure anxiety of walking into a foreign supermarket for the first time, her chaotic initial attempts at cooking for herself, and the lonely nights she spent crying herself to sleep from sheer homesickness. She detailed these profound vulnerabilities with a surreal sense of calm, as if she were merely dissecting the plotline of someone else's biography. Yet I could already vividly picture the exact scenario playing out in my head. How a highborn princess who had never once lifted a single finger to do manual labor in her life was forced to face the raw helplessness and crushing isolation of reality all on her own. We finished the remainder of the meal in absolute profound silence. Yet the atmosphere was radiating an incredibly intense, deep-seated warmth. The moment we finished, she fiercely insisted on handling the dishes, and I didn't even bother trying to contest her. Instead, I simply leaned against the kitchen doorframe, quietly observing the beautiful silhouette of her back as she rolled up her sleeves, and completely immersed herself in the chore at the sink. Under the soft overhead glow, the delicate contours of her profile looked utterly ethereal. And a sudden sharp realization hit me that whether we were drowning in debt or aggressively grinding to launch a new corporate empire, none of that material chaos actually mattered anymore. The singular consuming desire left in my soul was to freeze this exact reality and make these peaceful days last just a little bit longer, even if only for a fraction of a second more. Life began to mirror a perfectly calibrated high-end mechanical clockwork, and under the immense weight of our combined relentless execution, every single piece of our daily routine began to click into place with flawless, unshakable precision. During the blinding rush of the daytime hours, I aggressively engineered corporate tech projects, while simultaneously micromanaging our shared high-stakes debt crisis. Yet the exact second I unlocked the front door at night, there was always a warm welcoming beacon of light and a steaming feast waiting to restore me. Meanwhile, Su Yuan Yuan was funneling 100% of her soul, mind, and energy into building her brand new design empire. She successfully navigated the legal corporate registration, constructed a sleek, high-end digital portfolio website, and even began aggressively dominating several premium global art platforms, broadcasting her deeply sophisticated avant-garde philosophies on interior aesthetics. Alongside her jaw-dropping conceptual design blueprints, her raw elite genius was completely undeniable. And it took almost no time at all to captivate a highly dedicated, fast-growing cult following. Even though we hadn't secured a massive, high-paying commercial contract just yet, her daily life was completely booked, bursting with productive, fulfilling hustle. The underlying dynamic binding the two of us together naturally evolved into an incredibly organic, profoundly comfortable state of harmony. We functioned flawlessly as elite co-living roommates, and stood shoulder to shoulder as ride-or-die corporate partners battling in the trenches. Yet there were fleeting, breathtaking moments where my mind would completely drift, making me feel as though we were a deeply bonded old-school married couple. When the weekend arrived and our kitchen reserves were completely depleted, "Hey, the fridge is totally bare. Let's make a run to the supermarket together," she suggested, playfully waving a meticulously penned grocery checklist right in front of my face. I offered an immediate willing nod, grabbing the keys to the vehicle. This marked the absolute maiden voyage where we stepped out like an ordinary everyday couple, navigating the aisles of a local hypermarket side by side. The massive store was absolutely teeming with dense crowds of shoppers, overflowing with the chaotic, beautiful noise of domestic everyday life. Su Yuan Yuan took total command of the shopping cart, meticulously scrutinizing and comparing every single item lined up on the store shelves. She would completely pivot over a mere fraction of a dollar, ruthlessly ditching her usual brand for a more cost-effective yogurt selection. Yet, in the exact next breath, she'd let a gorgeously designed packaging betray her, gladly purchasing a bag of wildly impractical luxury imported pasta. I trailed right behind her silhouette, silently admiring how she constantly alternated between a hyper-calculated accountant and a chaotic, childlike free spirit bursting with spontaneous whimsy, finding her entire existence to be breathtakingly vivid and alive. But right as we were patiently lined up in the queue for the cash register, a highly hesitant, questioning voice echoed out from the adjacent aisle. "Wait, is that actually you, Li Xuan?" I frowned, pivoting around only to find a hyper-trendy, flashily dressed woman staring directly at my face with an expression of pure, unadulterated astonishment. I aggressively scanned my brain for several long seconds before finally dragging her identity out from the absolute dustiest corner of my college memories. She was an old classmate from our undergraduate university days, by the name of Lin Feifei, the exact same girl who used to share a dormitory room with Su Yuan Yuan. "Hey there," I responded, offering her a strictly polite formal nod. Lin Feifei's hypercritical gaze immediately bypassed my frame, locking directly onto Su Yuan Yuan, who was standing right in front of me. The exact split second her eyes fully processed Su Yuan Yuan's bare face, that initial astonishment instantly mutated into an expression of absolute jaw-dropping shock, heavily laced with a sick, completely unvarnished trace of toxic schadenfreude. "So, Su Yuan Yuan," she aggressively cranked up her volume, deliberately causing a dozen nearby shoppers to instantly swivel their heads toward us. "Oh my god, it really is you." I swore my eyes were playing tricks on me. "How on earth did you end up all well?" She abruptly cut her own sentence short, but the absolute wave of pure toxic disgust radiating from her eyes said everything. Su Yuan Yuan was rocking nothing but a basic, completely plain white graphic tee, paired with ordinary denim jeans, her face completely bare of even a single drop of premium makeup. And although her overall complexion was infinitely healthier than the broken state I originally found her in, when standing next to this immaculately airbrushed, head-to-toe luxury brand-flexing version of Lin Feifei, she still appeared completely stripped of her former high society glamour. Su Yuan Yuan's entire frame went entirely rigid, every single ounce of color instantly draining from her face as she paralyzed up. Her immediate survivalist instinct was to frantically flee, desperately trying to erase her existence from the room. Seeing this, I took a massive, calculated stride forward, effortlessly anchoring my body like an unshakable shield directly in front of her, instantly severing Lin Feifei's highly predatory, suffocating gaze. "It's been a while," I stated, my tone dropping to a sub-zero, icy detachment. "We're currently on a tight schedule, so we'll be taking our leave now." Without missing a beat, I smoothly wrestled full control of the shopping cart away from Su Yuan Yuan's trembling hands, and aggressively pushed it forward, fully prepared to vanish from her presence. "Oh, come on, what's the absolute rush?" Lin Feifei scoffed relentlessly, checking our retreat as she blocked our path. Her toxic craving for scandalous gossip was now completely hyperactivated. "It's a high school reunion, shouldn't we catch up for a second?" Yuan Yuan, I vividly remember Lija mentioning that your entire family fortune. Wait, so you're actually shacking up with Li Xuan now? Her smug tone was absolutely dripping with toxic innuendo and malicious intent. As if she were screaming, look at this absolute downgrade. The once untouchable elite goddess of our campus is now reduced to leeching off a total broke nobody that she used to. Completely looked down upon. I brought my boots to a dead halt, pivoting around slowly to pierce her with a razor-sharp sub-zero glare. Lin Fei Fei. I enunciated, slamming each distinct syllable down like concrete. I suggest you watch your absolute mouth and show some respect. Wang Yuan stands as my elite corporate partner, and more importantly, she is my family. That sacred word, family, was delivered with a booming, thunderous resonance that commanded the entire aisle. Lin Fei Fei was instantly paralyzed by my terrifyingly lethal gaze, and the overwhelming, oppressive aura of dominance radiating from my frame. Her jaw hung open in a pathetic silent gasp, completely losing her nerve to utter another single word. Ditching her useless presence entirely, I tightly locked my fingers around Su Yuanyuan's trembling hand, marching straight out of the hypermarket under the intense whispering stares of the crowd. Su Yuanyuan's skin felt completely ice-cold, vibrating with violent, uncontrollable tremors. The exact moment we retreated into the car, she went entirely radio silent, staring blankly out the passenger side window. As her fragile shoulders began to subtly convulse, I intentionally refrained from turning the ignition key, and didn't utter a single sound. I knew with absolute certainty that this agonizing, humiliating confrontation had violently ruptured the delicate emotional fortress she had spent weeks reconstructing, ripping open a bleeding, agonizing wound. It served as a brutal, unforgiving reminder that in the superficial eyes of high society, she was still nothing but a disgraced heiress who fell from grace, a walking joke. After an agonizingly long, heavy silence, she finally turned her head back toward me, her bloodshot, tear-rimmed eyes locking onto mine. Li Xuan, her voice cracked, heavily muffled by her choked-up sobs. Thank you back there for saving my dignity. I already established the fact that you are my family. I reassured her, staring deep into her fractured soul. I will never allow a single living soul to look down on you. My delivery was completely calm and calculated, yet it resonated with an absolute, unshakable, monumental power. She gazed intently into my eyes, as a fresh torrent of tears broke loose like a severed necklace, cascading down her cheeks. Why? Why are you treating me with this much unconditional devotion? She choked out between heavy, ragged breaths, reopening the chaotic emotional wound that we had already analyzed and debated 1,000 for sure. Yet, do gazing intently into her tear-stained, devastatingly beautiful face. A heavily fortified bastion deep inside my soul felt as though it were violently struck by a massive, unyielding wrecking ball. 8 grueling years have passed since that fateful game of truth or dare, and between the two of us, there was always a razor-thin superficial barrier labeled as cold business transactions and agonizing moral debts. I had spent every waking moment meticulously guarding that specific boundary, fully aware that keeping it intact was the ultimate defense mechanism for her, as well as the perfect emotional shield for my own vulnerable heart. But at this exact turning point, back in the suffocating aisle of that hypermarket, the split second those words, "she is my family," escaped my lips, I realized that I had personally shattered that fragile illusion once and for all. I was completely done using ruthless corporate logistics as a convenient shield. I reached across the console, using the soft pad of my thumb to gently wipe away the cascading tears staining her cheeks. And then I slowly leaned my upper body forward, closing the distance between us. Enclosed within the hyper-intimate, cramped atmosphere of the vehicle's cabin, I softly pressed my lips against hers. Her entire frame instantly went rigid with a sudden sharp jolt, her eyes widening to absolute maximum capacity from sheer unadulterated shock. Her lips felt incredibly ice-cold, seasoned with the bitter, salty residue of her tears. Yet they were breathtakingly soft. The kiss was exceptionally light, a profoundly tender embrace entirely stripped of raw carnal desire, serving as nothing less than a monumental declaration that was overdue by 8 entire years. I slowly pulled back, gently resting my forehead directly against hers, staring straight into her wide, completely overwhelmed and bewildered eyes. Because from the exact historic moment I received those $90,000 8 years ago, I murmured, locking my intense gaze onto her very soul, delivering each separate syllable with an absolute, profound, and razor-sharp gravity. You ceased to be just a wealthy benefactor holding a financial debt over my head. You became the dazzling celestial light I spent 4 undergraduate years looking up to, and you were the absolute singular catalyst that fueled my relentless grind. For 4 brutal years of nonstop hustle, that unexpected, breathtaking kiss mirrored a heavy stone violently hurled into the center of a perfectly placid lake, and within the chaotic, hyper-turbulent depths of Su Yuanyuan's emotional core, it triggered wave after massive wave of unshakable, wildly radiating ripples. Su Yuanyuan could with absolute vivid clarity register the searing warmth radiating from my lips. blended with the uniquely grounding, intensely comforting woody fragrance of my cologne. Even after I gently broke the physical contact and created distance, Su Yuan Yuan remained totally locked in that exact frozen, hyper-paralyzed posture, her entire cognitive bandwidth completely short-circuiting into a total pristine blank slate. What monumental confession did he just utter out loud? He explicitly stated that I was the exact celestial light he spent 4 entire years looking up to. He boldly declared that I was the absolute singular endgame driving his relentless grind for 4 long years. These heavy emotional words felt like a rapid-fire sequence of soft tactical bombs, violently detonating right inside Su Yuan Yuan's buzzing ears, leaving her fragile, newly constructed psychological fortress completely compromised, pulverized into absolute microscopic dust. Yet in this shocking twist of fate, what was exposed beneath the wreckage wasn't a mangled, bleeding flesh wound, but rather buried deep under the catastrophic rubble lay a long forgotten spark of life that Su Yuan Yuan herself had buried ages ago. Su Yuan Yuan's vocal cords were entirely parched, rendering her completely speechless, fresh teardrops still clinging loosely to her long eyelashes, making her look utterly disheveled, yet strangely poetic. You're just throwing a pity party for me, right? That was the absolute singular defense mechanism her brain could formulate, because I had just witnessed the absolute rock-bottom apex of her humiliation, and because I had fiercely guarded her dignity right in front of her toxic old classmate. She assumed I was merely deploying this dramatic confession to hand her some cheap, superficial, emotional consolation. Pitying you, I countered, staring dead into her fractured soul, my pupils completely devoid of even a single trace of condescending mercy, radiating an intense burning energy that Su Yuan Yuan simply couldn't decipher. Su Yuan Yuan, have you completely blocked out the reality of 8 years ago? Between the two of us, who was the actual pathetic charity case back then? Su Yuan Yuan froze completely, her mind paralyzed. I was rocking a faded, heavily washed thrift store jacket. The night I stepped into that high-end KTV lounge dripping in wealth and avant-garde luxury. I couldn't even scrounge up the loose change to cover my own split share of a basic meal. To that elite circle of friends you kept. I wasn't even significant enough to be considered a proper punchline. My tone remained deadly calm and level, as if I were simply narrating the plotline of a totally separate person's life biography. Back during that dark phase, did you ever once pity my existence? I pressed, causing Su Yuan Yuan to instinctively shake her head in frantic denial. Not for a single second, she confessed internally. Back then, she resided on a high society pedestal floating in the clouds, completely insulated from the harsh, grueling struggles of ordinary human survival. The way she perceived my entire entity was akin to observing a life form existing in a totally separate lower dimension. There was raw curiosity and profound confusion, but absolutely zero room for condescending pity or cheap sympathy. Their realities simply didn't exist on a level where those emotions could align. Exactly, you never pitied me, I affirmed, closing the gap. Instead, you utilized a method that even your own subconscious mind couldn't possibly comprehend at the time, and handed me a golden ticket to change my destiny. You used a mere $90,000 to build a solid bridge for me, granting me the golden opportunity to crawl out from the pitch-black, suffocating abyss I was trapped in, and cross over to the other side just to catch a glimpse of the light. From that exact life-changing day onward, you stood proudly at the far end of that bridge. I spent every single day sprinting down that path like an absolute madman, sprinting without a pause. Oh, it took. Because the second I lifted my eyes, your silhouette was always right there in my sight. You became my ultimate North Star, my sole direction. I never even dared to dream that I would one day possess the right to genuinely stand right by your side. My only goal was to run with everything I had until I finally reached the finish line, hoping to at least be worthy enough to look you dead in the eye as an equal, so I could finally return every single thing I owed you, with my head held high and my absolute dignity intact. It took me 8 grueling years, but I finally conquered that finish line. I gently extended my hand, tenderly brushing away the fresh tear tracks staining Su Yuan Yuan's pale face once more, my gaze burning with unadulterated passion and absolute sincerity. But the moment I arrived, I realized you were no longer standing at the far end of that bridge. You had fallen off, plunging straight into a toxic bottomless quagmire far deeper than the one I survived back then. So this time, my voice softened, shifting into an incredibly tender, soothing melody. It is officially my turn to build an unbreakable bridge for you. Su Yuan Yuan's tears completely burst through her remaining defenses, cascading down like a ruptured dam. So that was the hidden truth all along. To think that a frivolous game Su Yuan Yuan had completely wiped from her memory, and a random sum of pocket change Su Yuan Yuan had never thought twice about, had actually burned such a profound, unshakable brand. Deep into the absolute core of my soul, soul. To think that a tiny pebble she had completely discarded without a second thought back then could actually, against all odds, permanently alter the entire roaring current of a human being's destiny. And now that very same powerful current was surging backward in a violent reverse flow, desperately fighting to breathe life back into her completely parched, withered existence. Her throat locked up, leaving her utterly incapable of uttering a single syllable. She could do absolutely nothing but stand paralyzed as I violently pierced through her chaotic, ruined world. With a blinding, magnificent beam of light that bore the name Li Xuan, Su Yuan was completely oblivious to how we even managed to make it back to the apartment. The only vivid memory etched into her mind was the exact second I fired up the car engine, when I naturally and seamlessly interlaced my fingers with her freezing hand resting limply on her lap. My palm felt incredibly broad, radiating a profound warmth and packed with absolute reassuring strength. I maintained a heavy, resolute silence throughout the entire drive, yet the ironclad, non-negotiable pressure of my grip held onto her hand with absolute unyielding intensity. The very second we stepped back inside the apartment, I helped her systematically stock the fresh groceries directly into the refrigerator, before naturally gliding straight into the kitchen just like any other ordinary day. I threw on my apron and calmly began preparing a comforting home-cooked dinner, and began cooking our dinner. Su Yuan stood motionless in the living room, silently gazing at my broad back as I hustled around the kitchen, tall, composed, and radiating an overwhelming sense of absolute security. This exact man whom she had once left entirely behind, in the dust as a quiet, completely penniless student, had completely evolved before she even realized it, growing into a towering, unshakable sanctuary, fully capable of shielding her from life's most brutal storms. I walked out carrying 2 bowls of steaming fresh noodles, placing them gently onto the dining table before saying, "Let's eat." Su Yuan slowly took her seat, holding her chopsticks but frozen in hesitation, unable to take a single bite. Li Xuan, she locked her eyes onto mine, summoning every single ounce of courage left in her entire being, to finally voice the most crucial question burning between us. What exactly is the dynamic between us right now? I raised my eyes, staring at her delicate face, which was completely filled with intense anxiety and vulnerability, and suddenly let out a soft smile. That single expression mirrored the radiant warmth of a winter sun, instantly melting the very last remnant of frost guarding her heart. I didn't offer a verbal reply. Instead, I simply reached my hand across the space between us, using the very tips of my fingers to gently, tenderly guide a stray lock of hair that had fallen across her cheek, and tuck it neatly behind her ear. The gesture was profoundly tender, charged with an undeniable, unspoken intimacy. In that singular, breathless moment, Su Yuan understood absolutely everything. The following morning was Monday, and I headed out to the corporate office early in the morning just like any other day. Yet Su Yuan knew with absolute certainty that our entire reality had shifted completely. For the absolute first time after I exited the apartment, she was hit by a profound wave of loneliness from the empty space. She quietly walked up to the entrance of my master bedroom. The door was left slightly ajar, revealing an interior that perfectly mirrored my signature aesthetic. Hyper-minimalist, sleek, and sharp. Every single item was organized with flawless, immaculate precision, perfectly capturing my rigid, highly disciplined, and calculated personality. Resting on the mattress were the exact pajamas I had just shed, still clinging onto the faint residue of my body heat and distinct scent. Driven by a sudden, inexplicable impulse, Su Yuan stepped inside, gathering those clothes tightly into her arms, burying her entire face deep into the fabric, as she took a deep, intoxicating breath. Her senses were completely overwhelmed by my scent, and that sudden realization caused a crimson blush to instantly scorch her cheeks, leaving her feeling exactly like a thief caught red-handed. She instantly tossed the garment back onto the mattress, bolting out of my bedroom as fast as her legs could carry her. Yet her heart was violently thumping against her ribs like a panicked caged animal. So this was the raw, genuine sensation of falling completely head over heels for someone. A suffocatingly sweet, chaotic rush overflowing with total vulnerability. For the entirety of the morning hours, Su Yuan remained totally paralyzed within this psychological whirlwind, rendering her completely incapable of focusing on a single productive task. It wasn't until her legal counsel dialed her phone that she was violently yanked back to reality. "Miss Su," the attorney began, "the banking consortium has officially ratified the preliminary settlement statement. However, we urgently require you to furnish specific documentation regarding your father's early corporate asset portfolio. Specifically, the offshore holdings data is absolutely critical for our next round of litigation. Do you happen to recall where such highly sensitive files would typically be secured?" Su Yuan desperately scanned her memories before answering. "My father, he maintained a highly classified fortified safe. It wasn't located at the corporate headquarters, nor was it hidden in our primary residence. It's secured deep inside our old ancestral estate located out in the suburban countryside. That specific manor was the exact sanctuary where she had spent her childhood years. But following her family's relocation to a high-end luxury penthouse in the metropolitan center, the estate had remained entirely vacant, with only a trusted caretaker visiting on a fixed schedule to maintain the grounds. Following the catastrophic financial collapse, that property, alongside every single piece of real estate under their name, had been officially seized and locked down with court-ordered judicial seals." "Understood, that is excellent information," the attorney replied. I will immediately petition the magistrate for an emergency warrant, citing the retrieval of critical evidentiary documents as legal grounds, to grant us a singular temporary window of access. Please be fully prepared, as your physical presence will likely be mandatory to locate the safe. The moment the call disconnected, Su Yuanyuan's heart sank straight into her chest. Returning there meant confronting the ghost town that once harbored every single one of her pristine childhood memories, which had now been completely reduced to a tragic monument of ruin. A wave of pure dread washed over her. Su Yuanyuan immediately relayed the developing situation to me, and I went completely silent on the other end of the line for a brief moment, before responding firmly. There's no need, your corporate schedule is already hyper-congested. I said, I am standing right by your side. I cut in my voice laced with an absolute unshakable authority. 48 hours later, accompanied by our legal representative, we stood directly in front of those painfully familiar. As I finally stood directly in front of that painfully familiar iron gate, the official judicial seals had already been sliced open, and two stone-faced bailiffs stood rigidly by the entrance, supervising the entire emergency intrusion with zero emotional attachment. Su Yuanyuan locked her eyes onto the painfully familiar ornate iron gates, surveying the overgrown courtyard where the once manicured gardens had mutated into a wild, untamed jungle of weeds due to months of abandonment, causing her eyes to instantly brim with burning tears. She vividly remembered that the rustic garden swing was a 5th birthday gift, handcrafted by her doting father just for her, while that sprawling, desolate lawn was the exact site where her lavish 18th birthday coming-of-age gala had hosted the city's entire elite class. Every single leaf and stone on these historic grounds was deeply etched with her pristine childhood milestones, and the absolute pinnacle of her family's former dynastic glory. Now everything was completely hollow, the golden era long dead. Su Yuanyuan felt as though her trembling legs were suddenly filled with lead, rendering her completely paralyzed, unable to take even a single step forward. Just then, a warm, firm hand tightly enveloped hers. I intentionally refrained from offering cheap, generic comfort, choosing instead to deliver a reassuring, powerful squeeze to her palm, before gently anchoring her frame, step by agonizing step, guiding her straight into this melancholic labyrinth that felt simultaneously nostalgic and completely foreign. The interior of the manor was blanketed under a ghostly layer of fine dust, with every single piece of luxury furniture shrouded in eerie white dropcloths, resembling a congregation of silent, haunting specters. The stagnant air was heavily saturated with the suffocating stench of decay and forgotten history. Relying strictly on muscle memory, Su Yuanyuan led our small entourage up to the 2nd floor, navigating directly to the absolute deepest alcove of her father's private study. It was a heavily fortified elite vault room, where the walls had once been lined with multi-million-dollar masterpiece paintings. There now remained nothing but the faded hollow outlines of empty frames etched into the wallpaper. Su Yuanyuan approached a hidden accent wall, recalling the exact intricate sequence required to activate a row of mechanisms masterfully camouflaged as vintage leather books, punching in the classified security override. With a heavy groan, the wall panel slowly slid aside, revealing a massive military-grade embedded wall safe. Both the corporate attorney and the court-appointed officials instantly let out audible gasps of genuine astonishment. Su Yuanyuan meticulously spun the heavy combination dial, finally swinging open the massive, heavily armored vault door. Contrary to expectation, it didn't contain mountains of glittering gold or priceless jewels, but instead housed rows of immaculately cataloged financial dossiers, alongside a few premium velvet keepsakes. Su Yuanyuan gently pried open the lid of the first box, revealing a breathtaking sapphire necklace resting silently against the fabric, the absolute favorite heirloom jewelry piece of her late mother, while the adjacent box preserved a luxury custom-tier men's wristwatch, the exact milestone keepsake she had purchased at her very first gift to her father. It turned out that in her father's eyes, the ultimate, most irreplaceable treasures were never those multi-million-dollar masterpiece collectibles, but rather these priceless tokens completely saturated with pure family sentiment. Su Yuanyuan's emotional floodgates totally ruptured, her heavy tears cascading down, staining the premium velvet boxes. I quietly stepped forward, enveloping her frame in a tender back hug, refraining from uttering a single word, merely resting my chin gently atop her head, using my radiating body heat to offer her a silent, unshakable sanctuary. In that singular, breathless moment inside this freezing vault, cluttered with agonizing, traumatic ghosts of the past, Su Yuanyuan, for the absolute first time in her life, anchored into a profound, unprecedented sense of total security. She finally realized she wasn't weathering this apocalyptic storm alone. Though her pristine past had been violently shattered into a million jagged shards, her future, completely intertwined with my present, was being meticulously reconstructed piece by healing piece. Deep within the old ancestral estate's fortified vault, we successfully unearthed the ultimate game-changing financial dossiers. Those files didn't just contain Su Yuanyuan's father's offshore corporate equity deeds, but also preserved several ironclad early-stage asset trust agreements, The moment our elite legal squad laid eyes on these blueprints, their pupils literally flashed with raw excitement. Miss Su, this is an absolute masterclass of a discovery. Su Yuanyuan's lead counsel, Attorney Wang, exclaimed, practically vibrating with adrenaline as he looked at me. With these ironclad receipts in our arsenal, our leverage against the banking cartel just skyrocketed exponentially. This serves as definitive legal proof that your father never maliciously siphoned corporate funds. Rather, long before the empire ever faced a liquidity crisis, he had already executed a tactical, bulletproof asset installation strategy exclusively to protect his family. From a strict litigation standpoint, this hands us absolute dominance at the negotiating table. This was without a shadow of a doubt the first blinding ray of light at the end of a pitch-black tunnel. Granted, fully untangling this catastrophic financial web was still a long, grueling marathon, but we had finally captured a legitimate glimmer of hope. As we officially exited the ancestral grounds, Su Yuanyuan paused to cast one final glance back at the sprawling, majestic manor, which looked profoundly melancholic and nostalgic, basking under the crimson twilight glow. Yet the crushing grief suffocating her heart had visibly begun to dissipate. Perhaps the absolute best way to bid farewell to a broken past isn't to force yourself to forget, but rather to muster the raw courage to salvage the most precious fragments and use them to fuel your relentless march forward. Throughout the entire return journey, Su Yuanyuan remained softly melted against my shoulder, uttering absolutely zero words. I likewise maintained a comfortable, validating silence, quietly adjusting the car's premium audio system to softly play her absolute favorite orchestral rendition of Castle in the Sky. The beautiful, melancholic melody drifted through the cabin like a gentle hand, flawlessly smoothing away the agonizing creases trapped inside her wounded heart. From that pivotal day forward, life felt as if it had been fast-forwarded. Armed with the game-changing offshore evidence we had successfully unearthed, our legal squad unleashed a fierce tactical offensive against the banking cartel. Simultaneously, Su Yuanyuan finally stood on the glorious precipice of welcoming the absolute premier breakthrough for her brand new entrepreneurial career. Exactly 1 week later, Su Yuanyuan's phone suddenly buzzed with an unrecognized incoming call. The voice on the other end introduced themselves as the general manager of a luxury boutique hotel, stating they had discovered her viral portfolio pieces regarding spatial aesthetics and interior blueprints floating around social media. They were profoundly captivated by her artistic philosophy and wanted to formally commission her to spearhead the premium interior styling and layout concepts for their brand new ultra-exclusive VIP executive lounge. The second the call disconnected, Su Yuanyuan literally jumped for joy right there on the spot. This was her absolute first legitimate high-profile corporate client. She practically sprinted into the private study, throwing her arms around me while I was meticulously analyzing financial sheets. I actually secured the contract. Li Xuan I officially locked in my first major gig. The sudden impact nearly threw me off balance, but I recovered instantly. A massive, profoundly genuine smile illuminating my entire face. Stabilizing her by her shoulders, I gazed down at her flushed, breathless face radiating pure adrenaline, my pupils completely overflowing with deep admiration and immense pride. I always knew you possessed the elite talent to crush it. In that breathtaking moment, my validation resonated louder than any potential multi-million-dollar corporate triumph, satiating her soul to the absolute fullest. Su Yuanyuan funneled every single drop of her artistic passion straight into the life-changing hotel project. She pulled consecutive grueling all-nighters, filtering through mountains of architectural archives, and drafting dozens of hyper-detailed conceptual blueprints. I deliberately refrained from micromanaging any of her creative choices, but the exact moment she began burning the midnight oil, I would silently slip into the room to hand her a mug of steaming hot milk. Whenever her creative flow hit an impenetrable wall, and frustration began to cloud her mind, I would gently guide her outside for a midnight stroll, sharing hilarious behind-the-scenes corporate stories from my own tech hustle. To masterfully diffuse her mental gridlock, I acted as her ultimate bulletproof safety net, always standing by her side whenever she needed it most, providing the most rock-solid, unwavering support. Half a month later, armed with an absolutely flawless masterclass proposal, Su Yuanyuan finally met with the hotel manager. The executives were completely blown away by her innovative layout, officially signing the contract right there on the spot. The upfront design deposit was instantly wired straight into the corporate account of Yuanyuan Design. The moment her phone buzzed with the bank's automated text message, staring blankly at that very first stream of independent revenue. Emotional tears surged to the brim of her eyes, nearly spilling over. Granted, compared to the astronomical crushing debt her family owed, this sum was merely a microscopic drop in a vast ocean. But to Su Yuanyuan, the psychological milestone was monumental. It served as definitive living proof that she was no longer a helpless parasite or a codependent burden. She was fully capable of using her own two hands and her own elite artistic brilliance to violently reclaim her life. Clutching her phone like a lifeline, Su Yuanyuan bolted straight out of the apartment, sprinting all the way to the pavement right outside my corporate headquarters. She dialed my number. Breathless, "Get downstairs right now." Like right this second. Hurry. A few frantic minutes later, I came rushing out of the glass skyscraper looking completely panicked. What's wrong? Did something catastrophic happen? Su Yuan Yuan didn't offer a single word of explanation. Instead, she instantly surged up onto her tiptoes. And right there, in broad daylight, surrounded by a massive crowd of bustling commuters, she firmly planted a passionate, unapologetic kiss straight onto my lips. Pulling back, she proudly hoisted her glowing phone screen right in front of my eyes. Beaming exactly like a straight-A student, flexing a flawless report card, Li Xuan. Look, I actually secured my own bag. I locked my eyes onto the transaction figures displayed on the screen, then shifted my gaze to her radiant, absolutely glowing face. I froze in absolute shock for a brief second, before letting out a booming, incredibly joyful laugh. Smiling warmly, I gently ruffled her hair. Well then, my brilliant consultant Sue, what does the boss want to feast on tonight? My treat. No way you're not paying for anything. Su Yuan Yuan lofted her chin high, declaring with absolute boss energy, tonight the tab's on me. Let's head back to the apartment, and I'll personally whip up my signature. $25 ultimate luxury shrimp rice bowl for you. I grinned ear to ear, tightly intertwining my fingers with hers. Deal. Let's go home. Underneath the fading twilight sky, our conjoined silhouettes stretched out long across the pavement, and in that exact moment I knew with absolute certainty that the long-awaited dawn-lit future belonging exclusively to us had finally officially arrived.